What insane thing did someone think was completely normal in their house? I knew a girl who'd get glasses of water, and whenever she couldn't finish the whole thing, she'd just dump the rest on the carpet because it's fine, it just absorbs it. I went to high school with a girl whose family would dress up their house like a model home being sold or something. For example, the dining room table was dressed with a plastic Thanksgiving feast with plastic food on nice plates and fake wine in fake glasses. When you walked into her bedroom, the bed was made with top corners open as if she had just got out of bed, and there was a tray with a fake bowl of cereal and a fake glass of orange juice. On the floor were coloring books and crayons as if a child lived in the room. They kept the place spotless, and every room had an odd theme of fake living. Her parents' bedroom had quite a few large African animal statues and fake rose petals leading to the bed. People actually get paid to live in model homes or homes for sale. They have to keep them immaculately clean and ready to be shown at any time. Maybe that's what happened. When I moved cities in grade 2 or 3, I didn't know anyone. I met someone the first day and he invited me to his house that weekend to stay over. Everything was great. We played GameCube and stayed up until 3 a.m., the latest I'd been awake to up at that point in my life. He said we had to sleep down in the basement so we don't wake his parents when we went upstairs. We go downstairs with our sleeping bags and immediately I knew something was wrong. The worst smell I've ever experienced filled my nostrils the further we descended. In the corner of the room was a bed covered in what looked like crusty blood and some pus-colored streaks. Turns out his mother had had a home birth the weeks before and kept the sheets as a memento. I haven't been back there since. You'd think the baby would be a good enough memento. Whole items of food left for days on the floor. Toddler not interested in that apple? That's fine. Just leave it there on the floor where he threw it. It'll work its way under a piece of furniture and out of sight if we give it some time. Once I went to these people's houses and there was an entire sandwich sitting in the corner of the living room floor. I was so distracted by it that I didn't really hear much of what was said during that visit. I just sat and stared at the floor witch. Well, that's how you get ants, and roaches, and mice, and rats, and I don't know what else. Truly revolting. I don't know how the author didn't mention the smell. Maybe these people did occasionally do a covert cleanup? I was friends with my Little League baseball coach's son. One day I was invited to their house for a playdate, and as I walked through the door I saw a huge framed white cloth with some weird symbol. I didn't think much about it because at the time I didn't know what the frick it was. My coach noticed me looking at it as I entered the house and said, my granddad wore that. It's been in the family for years. Naturally, I was like, oh, okay, whatever, and thought nothing of it ever again. Now that I'm older, I realize what it was. It was a clan robe. The worst part is that I am not white. When my brother and I were kids, we'd often comment that our next-door neighbor's house smelled like wee-wee. One day, my brother was playing video games with the kid from next door at his house and asked to use the restroom. The kid said, we just pee here, and started peeing in the closet. My brother peed in there too. When in Rome. Bathroom machete. Because, just in case, man. It's literally nothing more than a real machete that hangs in their bathroom, so if someone breaks in while you're fighting dirt dragons, you aren't at a total disadvantage. Everyone there was surprised when I said I'd never heard of it. I now keep a bathroom hammer handy because gosh darn it, that's a great idea. I had a friend in high school. Went to his house for the first time and everything smelled like wee-wee. Turns out he had a dog and his family never bothered to potty train or clean up after it. Everything in the house was covered in old dried up wee-wee and fresh puddles. While I was there, the dog wee-weed on my friend's bed and he didn't even care. He literally sleeps in his dog's number 1. Even I got wee-weed on. Never went to that house again. We were getting something out of his dad's closet when I noticed there was a ton of expensive electrical equipment in the back of it, all boxed up. I asked him about it. Apparently, his dad keeps everything new he gets for a year before he unboxes it and actually uses it. He didn't know why, and it still boggles my mind. The extent to which the owners had gone to preserve their furniture. Each piece of furniture, including the lampshades, had a custom-cut plastic shell draped over it. Every furniture leg had a plastic bowl underneath to distribute weight across the carpet, preventing indents. The strangest part was the plastic pathways laid out across the floor. These pathways were kind of like plastic carpets laid on top of the real carpet. You weren't allowed to walk on the actual carpet. Instead, you had to walk on these plastic mats that crisscrossed the floor and connected all of the rooms to each other. My friend's dad. When I was a kid, I used to stay for dinner, as kids do, but the dad would not eat with us. The mum would make a plate of food, take it down the hall, and slide it halfway under the door to the basement. A few seconds later, the plate would slowly slide under the door. Nobody at the house seemed to think this was odd, but I thought it was weird as all heck. The other odd thing that this family did was every weeknight at 7, on the dot, the family would clear out of the living room so the dad could come and watch Star Trek. Once the show was over, he'd go back into the basement and the family would move back into the living room. Fricking what? The dad was quiet, but seemed to be normal other than those odd habits. The family thought none of that was weird, and my friend thought it was funny that my dad ate with us at dinner. I came here to mention the friends who kept their bread in the oven, but clearly I'm out of my league. We had a human skull in a glass case in our living room growing up. It was years before I figured out that was really weird. My mum got it from a doctor friend or something, just some random head, not like a relative or anything. We call him Freddy, and we had to superglue his jaw back on every few years when it fell off. I guess I'd repressed the memories, but just typing this now, I recall touching it and playfully tossing it around gently at times. I'm torn between wanting to respect the dead and really wanting that skull. A 5-year-old in diapers. I was an adult literacy volunteer, and I went to this couple's trailer. A kid walks in shirtless, wearing a diaper. At first, I thought it was a joke, then I thought maybe developmental issues. Then the mother says, "About time to change a diaper, ain't it?" And the kid said defiantly, "You ain't gonna change my diaper." My friend's mum often threatened to murder the whole family when she was angry. This was very scary to me, but my friend hardly thought anything of it. She just acts like that was normal mum stuff. That's the kind of threat you never actually want to call out or play chicken with. You can't go telling them to put their money where their mouth was. That lady probably needed help on a serious note. I went to a friend's house and they had their halls lined with grandfather clocks. This was a little weird, but nothing major. The weird part came when his dad told me and my friend, "Don't you kids go around telling anyone about my clocks." Now I'll never forget about his precious, precious clocks. I'll never forget as a child visiting my friend's house and noticing the wallpaper they had in his hallways. The pattern was of undressed women. Throughout his apartment, just little au naturel women all over the wall. We were maybe 8 years old and it was amazing. A cow tongue in place of a birthday cake. It wasn't like they couldn't afford a birthday cake either. They just had a cow tongue with a single candle in it. I knew a guy one time who'd get completely undressed every time he took a number 2, and then take a shower afterwards to really clean up. He'd even do this at other people's houses. I was about 12 or 13, visiting my best friend's house for the first time. After lunch, I get the urge to take a number 2. So I go to the restroom, do my thing, finish up, and flush. Nothing. Nothing happens. I take a step back and flush again. Still nothing. So I start freaking the F out. I'm a kid, I just broke my friend's toilet, I don't have any money to pay for it or buy a new one. I'm standing there sweating, trying to figure out a plan, and after 15 minutes, I've still got nothing. I finally decide to fess up. I mean, I can't stay there all day, can I? They'll eventually figure out something is wrong, right? I step outside and sheepishly tell his mum that I broke the toilet. She starts laughing, goes into the bathroom, turns on the water flow to the toilet, waits a few minutes, and then flushes. Easy peasy. Everyone, the best friend, his mum, and his sister, then takes the opportunity to start laughing at me because I didn't know it was normal to turn the water on and off whenever I needed to use the bathroom. To this day, if I'm unfamiliar with a restroom, I always do a precautionary flush just to make sure everything is working the way it should. One summer when I was about 13, a friend of mine had a friend from her school that invited us over to go swimming in her pool. We go to her place and we were shown her room to change in. As I'm changing, my friend suddenly whispers, "What the frick?" And I turn around to see a bunch of used sanitary pads lined up on this girl's desk. She comes to join us in her room, and my friend flat out asks her what those are all about. She says very plainly, "Oh, they're for my dad so he can check that I'm not pregnant." You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below, and if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. I dated a guy whose family was just odd. They did things so differently. Sometimes I wondered if they might be aliens. No one in the house knew how to use a stove. They used the microwave or ate out. Every cabinet and drawer in the house was always wide open, like they had no idea you could close them. The rest of the house was clean and organized, which made it all a stranger. His mother walked around pretty much undressed constantly and took about 10 baths a day. His parents would go to McDonald's to watch TV, despite having a very nice TV with satellite. His family had a lot of grandiose tales, things like they saved 2 men from a plane crash and how the mother outran a pack of wolves in suburban Arizona. There is a lot more, but these were what stuck in my mind. Spent the night at a friend's house in the 6th grade. He lived with just his mum, dad wasn't in the picture, and he was an only child, so they had a close relationship. We were having a great time until his mum called him for bath time. With her. Like together. They even left the door open like it was nothing. Girl from my previous work invited some of us over for dinner. As it turns out, she had removed the toilet seating from her toilet. Because it doesn't look good enough with it on. You actually had to sit on the thin, cold ceramic rim. Since people have said this isn't uncommon in certain countries, this took place in Germany where toilets always have seats. I had a friend in high school whose family used a G.I. Joe aircraft carrier as a coffee table. I had one of those as a kid. It was so huge that my dad rigged a setup where it hung from my ceiling and he'd get it down for us to play with. One time after school, my friend and I tried to get it down with a broom, and one side came unhooked. It knocked my poor friend out cold. He wasn't allowed over after that. Paramedic here, 100 2-liter soda bottles filled with wee-wee because, quote, the toilet is broken. But where was he going number 2? Where was he doing that? Maybe he was just supremely good at holding it in until he got to work or the library or whatever. In any case, gross. No way that you fill that many bottles without a substantial amount of splashback over time. I had a friend named David and he invited me to his house once. Little did I know that his family were horrific hoarders. You couldn't see the floor of his house and I was literally stepping in bowls filled with cereal. At one point I saw a snake just slither through the refuse and immediately made up an excuse that I was sick so I could go home. What a nightmare! My parents were in a bowling league and would bring me home with them. I made friends with a girl who hung out at the bowling alley because she lived in a home on an acre next to it. She invited me to come to her house while my parents bowled. I asked my parents and they said I could. She walked to her house and when I walked in there was a lion cub chained to a coffee table in the back room. She asked me if I wanted to pet the lion. Of course I did. I pet the lion, we hang out, I go back to the bowling alley like nothing happened. I told my parents and they're like, sure kid, you pet a lion. Years later, when I am reading the paper, the girl and her family were being arrested for illegally having exotic cats. I showed my parents and had the best I told you so moment in my life. Not me, but when my dad was younger, he went to a friend's house who had a hallway filled with au naturel family pictures. One of my wife's co-workers invited us to a dinner party. He's a very accomplished doctor who is supposedly considered the foremost authority in his specialty. I knew the man had a huge ego, but nothing prepared me for what I saw when we went to his home. As soon as we walked in the door, there was a life-sized painting of himself that one of his patients had given him as a gift. Nothing strange about that. He saved a patient's life and they were very grateful, so they gave him a painting. His wife took our jackets, hung them up, then walked us to his massive living room where the rest of the guests are mingling. As I looked around the room to take in what a magnificent home this man has, I noticed there were hundreds of pictures lining his shelves and walls. Every single one of those pictures was of him. Not of his wife, not of his 4 wonderful kids, nor his siblings, parents, or someone he admires. Even the pictures that looked like they might have been group photos were cropped so that only he could be seen. I'm terrible at hiding my true feelings. My face usually gives me away every time, but I spent the next hour desperately trying to pretend like this wasn't remotely strange. After a few drinks, I decided to head to the bathroom. I had to take a dump, and I'm not shy about doing so at another person's home. I walked into their guest bathroom, closed the door, lifted up the lid, sat down, and grabbed one of a dozen books that were sitting next to the John. The first book I picked up is written by our host, so I picked up a different one and it was also written by him. I looked at the bookends and all of them were written by our host. Partly amused and partly disgusted, I looked up and noticed that there's a picture on a small table across from the toilet. It's him again, staring at me in the picture while I'm taking a dump. And no one mentioned the pictures to him, also I'm 100% certain it wasn't a troll or practical joke. In short, I went to someone's home and it was basically an enormous shrine to themselves. I was visiting one friend and we were about to go buy a 30 rack at a nearby liquor store. I tell him that we need to stop by an ATM so I can pick up some cash to pay. He just turns and looks at me and goes, "Don't worry about it, we can just go to the money drawer." This kid's family literally kept a drawer full of $20 bills in the kitchen that you could just walk up and grab whenever you needed something. It was pretty surreal. When I was in college, I played the drums in a band and we'd often practice at the guitar player's house, because his parents didn't care about the noise. The family was weird and the house smelled, but the thing that got me was the filth. There was always dog doo somewhere, and I don't think they ever flushed or cleaned a toilet. All of this was considered normal to them. Then one day the guy that played guitar walked over to the corner of the room and went wee-wee on the floor. I was stunned. He wasn't drunk or anything like that. This was normal to him. His parents didn't care either. It was just how they did things. My friend refuses to vacuum and her carpet is covered in a layer of loose hair. I met this kid in 3rd grade and he seemed normal. Cool kid. Funny. Anyway, I went to his house to work on a school project and his mother was a hoarder. Worst of the worst. She could have had a marathon of the hoarders on her own home. I guess the kid thought it was normal because he had been living in it since he was born. He was kinda disheartened when he came to my house and didn't have to climb over mounds of trash to take a leak. Dog crap. Old, crusty, all alongside the fresh and smelly pit bull crap all over the living room, while he'd just sit and watch TV in the room as if it wasn't even there. Yes, this was my house. Yes, this was my roommate. I'd pick it up, let the dog out to try housebreaking it. He did nothing. As I packed up my stuff to move out, I stopped picking up the dog doo, thinking that he'd man up. Nope. I had to step around these massive landmines as I moved out. This is like my 3rd submission for the question, and it's become clear to me I know some pretty dysfunctional people. Oh boy. Pal, I don't normally judge the people who submit here. That's for our other channel, Am I the Jerk? But maybe you need to start getting new friends. Unless all of these crazies in your life are also super affluent and paying for everything, then maybe you can keep one of them around. A white carpeted kitchen. Once when I was a kid, I was invited to stay over for dinner at a friend's house. My friend's mother poured a large quantity of ketchup into a cereal bowl, which the entire family all casually dipped their fingers into and licked throughout the meal. This sounds like something out of the Twilight Zone. They were testing you. I was invited over to a friend's house for dinner for the first time. Now, for staging purposes, they all sit around the living room to eat as a family. They have these 2 large dogs, so I asked beforehand, as I always do, what are the rules with dogs and food? Am I supposed to ignore begging? Can I give them a bite? What kind of stuff can I feed them? Do they have a trick to get some? They tell me that not only can I feed them whatever I want, but that all plates are given to the dogs after the meal, and the dogs would hassle you if you took the plate straight to the kitchen. So I finished my meal, which was decent, and I laid down my plate for the dogs. They clean it up quite nicely. I pick it up to the kitchen and I ask if it goes to the sink or the dishwasher. They said to put it back in the cabinet because the dogs clean it good enough to eat off of. I laughed at the joke and then kind of reiterated my question. It wasn't a joke. My friend walked into the kitchen and put her plate, her boyfriend's plate, and her mum and dad's plate all in the cabinet with the other, quote, clean dishes. I could have been sick. I dropped all contact with them. That was just too much. In short, their dishwashing was done exclusively by the dogs. This was when I was a kid. I was at my friend's house and her mum got us some orange juice with our lunch. When we finished eating, she took the remaining juice from the cups and poured it back into the container. Even as a kid, I thought it was disgusting. Kids in the home going to the fridge, grabbing a stick of butter, unwrapping it, taking a big old bite, rewrapping it, and putting it back. Went to a party in college and the kid living there had boxes of Cat Fancy magazine catalogued by month and year all over his room. When I asked about it, the dude just shrugged and said, "Yeah, I'm into cats." I was just too nervous to ask more. They keep a sewing needle and pin stuck into their hand towel. I found it by reaching to use the hand towel to dry my hands and putting the pin through my finger. I was like, "What the frick, guys?" And they just shrugged as in, "You don't have sharp objects hiding in your towels?" They then went on to explain that it was used for draining pimples.
What's the worst thing you've had or seen done by someone who was supposed to be a professional? Dentists will appreciate this one. My girlfriend at the time was unhappy with the appearance of her teeth, and rather than go with orthodontics, which my very professional dentist had recommended, opted to go the instant solution of crowns and veneers, nearly a dozen in all, suggested by a dentist at some random strip mall. Doing this work required she get 6 root canals. Her appointment for the work was a Friday at about 2 p.m. They worked on her for 3 hours, and when it was 5 p.m., it was quitting time. They stopped work, put a temporary bridge on her, and said they'd see her in 2 weeks, when her next appointment was scheduled, and sent her home. Once the lidocaine wore off, she was in agonizing pain. By Sunday, she literally asked me to kill her. Calls to the dentist service went unreturned. Monday morning, she called and was told the pain was normal and they wouldn't see her earlier. That afternoon, I called my dentist, explained the situation, and brought her in immediately. He gave her some lidocaine, which provided instant relief, and then took the temporary bridge off. Next, he said out loud, "Holy crap!" and told his assistant to get the camera and took about 50 pictures. He left and went into his office and then came back, put the temp on, gave her a script for Percocet, and told us to call her dentist again and make an appointment. We did it, and it was scheduled for 7 a.m. the next morning. Apparently, they had started 6 root canals on Friday, but not completed any of them. Just opened the tooth and exposed the nerve, but not actually destroyed it, and left the tooth open with minimal packing and no actual filling. And apparently, they expected my girlfriend to live with that for 2 weeks with no pain meds. I talked to my dentist about it at a later date, and according to him, this was about the single most painful thing a dentist could do to a person. And had they not taken the appointment the next morning, he was going to hand the pics over to the state's ethics review board. That sounds so painful. Thank God you guys were able to get her in to see your dentist quickly. Let this be a fair warning to anyone who's trying to save a buck on their dentist. Had a gynecologist cough straight into my, didn't cover her mouth, didn't turn away, just spread my legs and coughed. My girlfriend's parents saved money on their room addition by hiring a handyman to install the bathroom fixtures instead of a plumber. He mixed up the hot and cold pipes. It's really odd to sit on a toilet full of hot water feeling the steam rise on your butt. I'm sure that's weird at first, but I can see how that would grow on you. I had a teacher in college that took points off my essay for misspelling ludicrous. She didn't know it was a real word and thought I was referring to a pop artist. Had a professor lose my final exam. When I emailed him about why I was failing, he said, "Well, you should have been there for the test." After trying to convince him I was and him not believing me, I showed up to his office and demanded he allow me to go through the Scantrons. He threw a pile at me and rolled his eyes, thinking I was using this as a last resort. Nope. Almost 1,200 Scantrons later, I pulled mine out and put it on his desk. I made him run it through the machine as I watched. Granted, I understand that he had a lot of students and sometimes Scantrons get misplaced, but he shouldn't have been so disbelieving and rude over it. The thing is, I'm sure he has lazy people try and pull moves like this all the time, and probably just didn't want to go through 1,200 Scantrons himself. A doctor once prescribed me beta blockers to treat anxiety. On my follow-up appointment, I asked him about one of the side effects. He asked me what drug I was on. I explained it was the one he had prescribed me the week before, and told him the name of it. The dude proceeds to open a book of prescription drug information and tell me I probably shouldn't be taking it because it could be dangerous. I haven't been back. Maybe look into that kind of thing before prescribing the medication. I had wrecked my mountain bike on a South Mountain trail and ripped open my arm pretty good. I also broke 2 rims, cracked my helmet, and blew out my front shock. I was in and out of consciousness on the road to urgent care. Because it was early Sunday morning, the first two places we went to were closed, and we ended up at a little clinic. This young doctor, 3 years out of med school, cleaned my wound, pulled all the rock and dirt out of my skin, and then stitched up a large flap of skin that was torn back. He gave me 2 pain pills and told me to have a good day. Well, apparently you aren't supposed to stitch wounds up like that, and are supposed to let them drain or breathe. I went in 2 days later to get more pain pills because my arm hurt so bad it was keeping me up at night. The doctor on staff told me I had to be admitted to a hospital with an ER immediately because my whole arm was infected and it was starting to reach my lungs. I had a massive infection that ended up hospitalizing me for days, and then I had to have a surgery where they removed a good part of my forearm tissue to let it all regrow. I spent more than a month packing and cleaning out a dollar-sized wound as my tissue regrew. Worst experience of my life. Unfortunately, there's always someone who graduated at the bottom of the class. Professional roofer didn't seal the roof off properly at the end of the day. It rained that night and my parents' attic was filled with water. I'm from Spain and my parents are from Spain as well. I speak Spanish without any accent, not even a local accent. I speak like people on national TV. I'm white. There's no reason for anyone to think I'm a foreigner, but I have a French first name followed by the 2 most common Spanish last names. So I had a consultation with a psychologist. She had my medical history before the consultation. The first thing she asked was if I was having a hard time adapting to the country. I told her I'd always lived here, but I had a French name because my mom moved to Switzerland when she was 18 and moved back to Spain to give birth to me, so she was used to French names. So she asked me if my parents were having a hard time adapting to the country. I told her that my parents were Spaniards who had briefly spent time in Switzerland 25 years ago. Then she asked me again if I was finding Spain very different from my home country. At this point, I started getting irritated, but went along with it because I wanted psychiatric treatment, and she was the one who had to refer me. During the 45-minute session, she asked me several times if I was having a hard time adapting, and made numerous references to my status as an immigrant. To this day, I still don't know if she was crazy, on drugs, or just not listening to me. Probably the last option, unfortunately. For a profession that's supposed to be very good listeners, a lot of the times they don't do it so well. A sign language interpreter was working in a classroom. She only had one deaf customer, so instead of doing her work, conveying the message between spoken and sign language, she flirted the entire time with the guy who was sitting next to the deaf student. When I was working for an oil change place, I witnessed the manager of 15 years not put the oil in the car and send it on its way. I was working in the pit at a 2-bay store. While I was changing the diff, fluid on another car, waiting for the oil to drain, the manager did this without checking to see if it was ready. I didn't even get to put the plug back in. What are you doing? It wasn't even ready to put oil in it. The plug is still here. Oh, I thought you were done. You didn't even check if I was done. We found out later that he had just started a new hobby and was fired shortly after. My wife went to a professional conference out of town when she was 7 months pregnant with our first child. It was about a 4-hour drive from home and she was a little concerned, so she asked me to go with her. She didn't consult with her OBGYN. While we were there, her water broke. We went to the local hospital and they said she was going to be bedridden for the next several weeks, so unless we wanted to stay there, we should get in the car and drive like heck back to our hometown. When we got home, we went directly to the hospital and they admitted her. They kept her in a bed with her feet higher than her head and checked her several times a day for infections. Her OBGYN was nowhere to be found. My wife was a registered nurse at the same hospital where she was staying. Her friends, the other nurses, would come by and chat with her frequently. They let her know that the OBGYN was mad at her for leaving town without telling him and complaining to everyone in the hospital about her. After she'd been there for a couple weeks, the OBGYN showed up. I was in the room along with several of her friends. He smelled very strongly of alcohol. He walked up to the bed without saying anything while putting on a glove. He pulled up her gown and jammed his hand in while everyone was standing there. He then made a few incomprehensible sounds and stormed out. We didn't see him again for a couple weeks. The test for infection finally came back positive, so they were going to induce labor. Her OBGYN showed up, and even though the staff doctors said she could deliver normally, her doctor insisted that she needed a C-section. My wife was really disappointed, but we went along with what he said. We later found out he wanted her to have a C-section because he had a tea time that afternoon and didn't want to miss it. I wanted to complain, but he was the head of the department at the hospital, and my wife said there would be repercussions to her job if we did. This guy just sounds like the worst. When he's acting like that, who cares what he says anymore? Just do what you think is right. If you want to listen to the other doctors, then do that. When I was a teenager, I ended up having to have my first root canal at a new dentist because my father had switched insurance plans. Everything started out normal, but after about an hour into the procedure, the dentist told me that she needed to step out for a moment. At that moment, I still had one of those metal filing toothpicks stuck up into my tooth, so she told me not to close my mouth. I sat there with it open for over an hour. Apparently, she had gone off to do a procedure on another patient because my root canal had run over the time she had allotted for it. Surprise, surprise, my tooth had somehow become infected in this time, and I had to wear a temporary crown for a week and not eat anything that wasn't room temperature while I took antibiotics. When I finally got the permanent crown, it ended up being the brightest shade of white they had. I still haven't been able to get my other teeth to match it without professional whitening. It should be mentioned that this lovely dentist was Orly Tights, the lawyer-dentist who later went on to become the head of the Obama birther movement. I was a little surprised when I ended up seeing her on CNN. An electrician touching exposed wiring to see if it was on. I should also mention that he only had 3 fingers left on that hand. I once saw a professional fire dancer use a fire whip and accidentally set his own hair on fire. He proceeded to flip the heck out. I'm sure that one's just a hazard of the job. One of my history teachers in high school was a complete jerk. He looked like the villain from Air Bud. Red hair, Charlie Brown bulb of hair in the front with a mustache. He had done things like try to rip my papers apart when I stapled the wrong 2 together, ripped one in half and made me tape it back together. I completely hated the guy. One day, he brought his daughter to school and she wasn't acting the way he wanted. He locked her in the closet in the classroom. The entire school heard about it. Sounds like Child Protective Services might need to hear about it too. When I was around 14 or 15, we moved into a new apartment and I made a new friend. She was around my age and we hung out all the time. We would walk to the corner store a lot and she would go in the back room for lengths of time as I waited. I always wondered what she would do in the back room, but she would change the subject and I didn't worry too much since she wouldn't get in trouble and she was the only friend I had at the time, considering it was summer and I had just moved. Later, I saw her coming out with a cop. She didn't know I was in the store. When she saw me, she told me everything and told me not to tell anyone. Story is, she'd been sleeping with this cop for the past 3 months. He worked security at the convenience store part-time. He was an actual police officer. I stayed quiet but couldn't believe how someone that was there to protect us was sleeping with a 14 or 15-year-old in the back of a store. Also, how the owners allowed it and looked the other way. Worst part is he became really good friends with her mom. She never suspected a thing. He used his uniform to earn trust and abuse his power. She said she was in love with him. I stopped hanging out with her so much and we moved a couple months later. I was taking some long-distance courses in order to complete my university degree. One particular class was an economics class. The professor for that semester was filling in for the regular, and had never taught long distance before and was using the regular professor's materials. No big deal, it's really not that hard. So midterms roll around. We write the multiple choice midterm and our proctors mail it back to them. Being as there are people across the country and often in other countries taking the course, the tests take a while to come back and be graded. Cool, no problem. So one day we log into the online courseware and see that our grades are posted, along with a very long and ranty email from the professor. The entire class failed the midterm. She insisted that she double and triple checked the answer key, and that it was right, and that she never had such a thing happen before. She also admonished us for not studying hard enough and that we really had to work to pass the final. As you can imagine, there was nothing but uproar amongst the class. No one could believe that not even one person passed the midterm. So we waited for the midterms to be returned to us. Along the way, she decided to compromise and offer us a very fair final, doubling all the midterm marks so they were where they should be and to use the better mark between the two for the course grade, as long as the final was passed. Now it's 3 weeks before the final and everyone is flipping out to ensure we completely understand the material. Online study groups are created with questions and discussions abound. Then midterms began arriving back at students' homes. We began posting questions about the answers. Why was X wrong for question A? The professor gave very lengthy and detailed answers for the first few that had been posted. We were confused. The answers that she had given us were to questions that weren't on our midterms. The professor went silent. After berating us for being idiots and insisting it wasn't her fault, the professor profusely apologized for inadvertently correcting all the exams using the answer key for a different version of the exam. Had a locksmith try and fix an atrium door we have in our house. Something in the deadbolt mechanism broke and it refused to retract. This guy came in and couldn't get the lock apart. That is to say, he couldn't figure out how to get the bolts out and tried to get the faceplate off with a pry bar. Then he decided he needed to take the slab out of the opening, except the hinges were tamper-proof. So once the pins were out, he still couldn't get the door out. He tried prying the crap out of the hinges with another larger pry bar, damaging the door in the process. The next day, I was able to get the bolts out and got the door open myself. What the heck, dude? Maybe it was just his first day. Let me just start by saying I've had a peanut and nut allergy since infancy. When I was in preschool, there was a day that they were serving PB&J sandwiches. Me, being the smart little squeaker I was, called attention to the fact that I can't eat PB&J because I'm allergic to peanuts. One of my teachers came over to me, grabbed my sandwich, opened it up, and wiped the side with mostly peanut butter against the edge of a table and put it back together and gave it to me. I gave her a dead, confused, and repulsed stare, followed by a courteous, "Can I have something else, please?" The girl then fetched me broccoli and cheddar soup, and I ate that instead with pride. Later, of course, I told my mother, who rose up all hell. I mean, seriously, what the heck? Not only should my teachers have known about my allergies, but they should have had the sense to know that even the smallest amount of peanut butter will still in fact cause an allergic reaction. I had an electrician who claimed he could do network cabling. Added 3 network points the same way you added power sockets, by running a spur from one existing network point. The result? 4 network points in the office, perfect in every way except that you could only use one at a time. I don't think that's the result you wanted. When I was 6, I was sent to a therapist for ADHD. He decided to give me 11 different medications over the course of a few months. They made me appear to be completely insane. My behavior became strange and violent. My parents eventually made me a day patient at the local asylum because they caught me talking to things that weren't there. Thankfully, the therapist there got me off the cocktail and told my parents to sue the original therapist. I still remember the nightmares and hallucinations that would blend together. Let this be a lesson to always get a second opinion. After some severe bleeding, I went to the ER to see if maybe I'd had a miscarriage. Up till this point, there hadn't been any reason to think I may have been pregnant. The doctor ran a test and came back to tell me, "Congratulations, you're fertile, Myrtle, and yes, it miscarried." When I was a teen, I went to the ER because I had been bit by a cat. The doctor told me I should take antibiotics and asked what kind I wanted. To clarify, I'm not a doctor, nor was I one at age 13. I told the psych doctor in a mental facility that I had mood swings sometimes, but that they were always caused by something and were not random. Then he asked me if I ever saw or heard things. I said, aside from 2 or 3 of those minor, unreal images we all have when we're trying to wake up, nothing really. That was probably the wrong thing to say, because then he diagnosed me with having schizoaffective disorder. It tore my parents apart, and I had to explain to them several times that this guy was full of crap and blowing things out of proportion. Fortunately, my next doctor wasn't so quick to rush to judgment. My coworker doesn't know how to transfer calls. She just tells people to hang up and call us again and ask the receptionist for someone else. I feel like we all have that one coworker, right? In 4th grade, I hurt my ankle during recess and told my teacher I thought it was broken. I mean, my ankle had swelled to the size of an orange. Of course, the teacher dismissed me and had me go to the nurse, who said it was just a little sprain. I walked home that day, 8 blocks, with a shattered ankle. When I got home, I showed my mom and we went to the ER and I had to wear a cast for 8 weeks. Thanks, Teach. I work as a summer rec director for the local school district, so I basically spent my days watching 30 children of various ages run around a playground and get into trouble. Now, some of these kids have special needs, and in that case may have an aide to help keep an eye on them. One day, some boys around 10 found a hornet's nest in the ground, and unknown to me, decided to poke it with a stick. This understandably ticked off the bees, so they started to swarm around the area. I realized and started to warn the kids to stay away. While I did, a boy named Tim with autism started wandering over, oblivious to the problem in my shouts. His aide just stood there and watched him do it. I ran across the park, grabbed him, and carried him away, slapping the bees the whole time. He got stung 5 times, twice in the face. The aide said she had a phobia of bees and didn't want to get too close. I'm sorry, but it's your job. You gotta take one for the team there. You grab the kid and you run. I'm sure you have a phobia of being hit by cars too. You wouldn't just let him walk into the street. I applied for an apartment at a nice apartment complex in my town, and several months later, I got a phone call about a maxed out credit card I didn't own. As it turns out, the guy who processed credit checks was opening credit cards with the info on rental applications and maxing them out. He was genuinely surprised when he got caught. According to the arresting officer, he had over 50 stolen cards when they arrested him. I had a situation like this happen at a place where I once worked, where you could open a credit card in the store. One of the employees had a thing going where he was filling out fake applications and getting credit cards under other people's names. I remember the day the police came in and walked him out in handcuffs. You're always going to get caught doing something like that eventually. When working in a salon, this one girl would burn women on purpose with a curling iron if they annoyed her. She didn't last long. Bad attitude won't get you far. Well, yeah, you can't have an employee who's assaulting the customers. Teenage Redditors, what's the worst part of being a teenager these days? The pressure of being expected to go to a good college as you anxiously hear about student debt getting higher and higher. You kind of think it would be cool, but you're scared out of your mind of the prospect of being in debt for so many years after you graduate. At the same time as everyone's assuring you that if you don't go to college, you're a loser idiot who will work at McDonald's forever. Also, the idiotic technology stigma from older generations. I was reading a book on a Kindle for English in my French class, and she not only took it away from me, but yelled at me for texting during class. I tried to tell her that the thing was literally a slightly more advanced book, but she refused to believe me. On the same note, how online friends are considered not real because they're totally computer programs and not people on the other side of the monitor. My parents always tease me about not having many friends. When I do ask to go over to someone's house or vice versa, they say no. They want me to make friends without being with friends. Also, very high expectations suck. High expectations comes from every parent across every generation, I can promise you that. Having everyone ask what you want to do with your life. I don't even know what I want for breakfast. Everything is taken 20 times more serious. I got a 10-day suspension for a freaking box cutter in my car for work. I'm a straight-A student with perfect behavior. My dad points out in front of the whole school board that in the 70s, he had a shotgun in his car for hunting while he was at school. Yeah, times have changed. I would think a box cutter is being a little overly cautious though. Being treated like a child and then expecting us to act like adults and take on adult responsibilities the moment we turn 18. Again, generally applies to every generation. College educations cost more and mean less. Getting a degree is basically expected of us, and the great jobs that you're promised aren't always there when you're done. Storekeepers looking at you like you're about to steal something. Yeah, I remember those days. I'm expected to transition from my youth to an adult instantly. I need to have my career planned out, my college picked, and a job on the side while I still suck at doing many things like tying my shoe. I suck at it, I don't know why. It's so much pressure and I don't feel I have the maturity needed yet, but I need to fake it to make it. I'm gonna give you a pro tip here, buddy. Everyone's faking it. Nobody knows what they're doing. There are no real adults as you know them as kids. We're all just winging it. Everyone expects you to do something great. I feel so pressured sometimes. I once had a teacher tell me, "Oh, that's not a grade I expect to see from you. You need to do your best," even when I had honestly done my best. I just turned 20 and for a while I was really sad about it because I felt like I wasn't done being a teenager. This thread has confirmed for me that turning 20 really isn't that bad. It's just that most of my teenage life involved being too sick to really do much. A lot of time was also spent being ruled by depression and anxiety. The good parts of my teens were so good that it made me wonder how my teenage years could have gone if all the crappy stuff hadn't happened and I'd just been normal. But in the last week or so, I've definitely learned that being 20 is infinitely cooler than being 16, and that while my teenage circumstances weren't normal in the slightest, it is normal to have a crappy time being a teen. Parents. I have a tracker on my phone, and my parents flip and scream at me whenever I turn it off. Oh, and the sudden gravity of the world in my situation here. Yeah, I'm sure it's hard with parents having access to the technology that they do now. At the end of the day though, I will say 99% of parents are just trying to make sure that you're safe. School food is at an all-time low. To be fair, how would you know? We get put down by our elders for being wrong in some way because of the time frame in which we were born. So what if we don't have to walk 5 miles uphill every day to get to school? That doesn't mean I'm any less a contributing member of society than you are. To be fair, you're still in school, so not technically contributing to society yet, but I'm sure you'll do fine when you get there. How much stricter the laws become and how easy it is to get into a lot of trouble. I hear all these stories from my dad and his friends, my uncles, friends' dads, and older cousins about all the things they did and how sometimes they would get caught by the cops doing regular stupid teenage stuff. Speeding, racing, drinking underage, paintballing in the streets, getting into fistfights, or getting caught with a little bit of pot. From what they told me, the cops seem a lot more relaxed and let them off with warnings because they understood that teens do stupid things and try drugs and alcohol. I hear all of these situations and think if I ever did any of this and got caught, I would very likely get in a lot of trouble and possibly put in jail. It seems like no one remembers that the time to screw up and learn from stupid mistakes is when you're a teenager. As for high school, if I did half the things I hear they used to do in high school, I would be in jail. I will say, yes, cops handle things very differently nowadays, and I think a lot of that would come down to better training. They find a kid drinking underage and literally want to ruin their life. They seem to forget that they're here to help and protect society, not screw them over and make a quota. Way too much focus on grades rather than learning. This also causes way too much stress in school that is unhealthy and can create a terrible connection between the student and the joy of learning. Also, the college process. Screw the college process. I would argue now that learning is a lot more lenient and that there's a lot of different types of learning available to you now. Back in the day, if you didn't follow the specific curriculum that was assigned to you or you weren't able to keep up with it, too bad. Aspiring to be great or do something meaningful with your life, then realizing the system and society you were raised in will be the first thing to beat you and your ambitions down. Oh, this kid's already figured it out. Being expected to work for free to get experience, especially knowing not too long ago on-the-job training was paid and covered what college and internships do now. We've all seen the memes. Employers want 30 years of experience but no older than 20 and they're only going to pay you 3 cents above minimum wage. The fact that we don't believe in our own generation. The fact that the generation preceding us doesn't believe in us, even though they complained when the generation preceding them did the same. No matter how great we are, what great things we do, we're classified as a lazy generation that isn't as good as those before us. But if this question was asked 5, 15, or 50 years ago, the answer would be the same. It's a multi-generational, unavoidable, self-deprecating cycle of stereotypes that are in place to help legitimize the elder generation after they felt scorned when they were teens. And instead of fighting it as a group, we agree and blame each other. Okay, here's what I'll say on this one. If they're complaining that you have it easier than they did, that means that the previous generation did accomplish something, and you're gonna make life a little bit easier for the generation after. That's kinda how it goes. If you're gonna choose not to acknowledge that, okay, go live in a cave and rub some sticks together until you make fire. I'll leave you in the woods with a hand axe and we'll see how long it takes before you can send me a text. Parents tell me I'm not educated enough on social issues and I'm not making up my own mind. I get educated on social issues and make up my mind on those issues, but I don't share my parents' opinions on things. Suddenly, my perspective on these issues doesn't matter because I'm too young and I lack real-world experience. Give me a break. Sounds like your parents wanted you to make your own decisions and aren't happy that you didn't make the same ones they did. The worst part is honestly homework. I would rather go to school for longer and have less breaks if we don't get any homework, because it just ends up being longer work than if we just added 2 more hours of school, and tons of stress. Also, an issue with this is that teachers don't necessarily communicate how much homework they're giving to the kids, and thus can end up giving them a lot more than intended when all of them start piling up. For me, it's the stereotypes about us. Not all of us are pot-smoking, weed sock-wearing, sex-crazed, uneducated, and disrespectful jerks. We're considered a terrible generation, when really we're probably no more rebellious or terrible than our parents were at that age. I gotta agree with you on this one, but let me tell you again, everyone who was ever a teenager went through this. Other kids my age that think they're better than us because they listen to classic rock. This is always going to be a thing. People are going to tell you that their music's better than yours. Doesn't matter when it came from or who it is. Everyone has their opinions and they think they're cool because of it. For me, it's peer pressure. I'm sure it was the same years ago, but I recently moved from Massachusetts to California, and it was my first time ever being legitimately exposed to anything like weed or alcohol. I spend time with the people who are all about partying and hooking up and stuff, and I don't like that stuff, but I like the people. So my best friend comes up to me with questions like, "So have you hooked up with anyone yet?" And I'm like, "No." And he instantly goes around to every girl he knows I'm into or finds somewhat attractive and asks them to hook up with me. And I know he means well, but it just makes me feel really weird because I was brought up being told never to touch drugs or alcohol and not to date until college and stuff like that. Just me, of course. It could be different for others. Also, you're constantly pressured to excel at something, and I don't. I'm just not amazing at anything. I'm average in every way. Let me tell you, buddy, 99.999999% of people are average. Don't feel like that's a mark against you. Being written off as a teenager regardless of your mental capacity or maturity. By that logic, one could write off humanity as a whole. Participation awards are dumbing everyone down. My peers are too entitled. Everyone's treated like a perfect star when they're younger because parents think their kids can't handle not being perfect, when it's really just the parents who want to see their kids be the best. Everyone grows up thinking they're special, and then either won't accept that they aren't when they're older, or has a hard time coming to terms with it. We're taught that we're all winners, but that takes away the joy of actually accomplishing or being good at anything. The peer pressure is overwhelming. The pressure to lose your virginity, smoke, drink, and do drugs. I'm almost 19, and I'm the last virgin among my friends. They're not really pressuring me to lose my virginity, but it just sucks to feel left out of the loop. It sounds like most of this pressure is coming from yourself. Don't worry, everyone takes life at their own pace. Being written off as a hormonal teenager really sucks. Parents don't believe that I'm depressed. They think I've been in a bad mood for these past few years. I'm pretty sure that harmful thoughts alone would merit a trip to a therapist's office. Not to mention the daily struggle of getting out of bed, going to school, hiding my wrists, pretending to be normal. I'm a teenager, so I'm just lazy or moody. One of my friends recently announced she's pregnant. She's 14. People say our generation is childish. I disagree. Our generation is growing up too fast. It's terrifying. I've yet to have my first kiss, drive a car, drink alcohol, have a child. All of these things that are now being achieved by kids 3 years younger than me. It's just not right. Knowing how badly the generations before us screwed the environment up is a really scary thought. The type of stuff other teenagers are into. No, Greg, I don't want to get drunk at 10 a.m. For me, it's just the transition. I just want to get settled, out of college, secure job, marriage. I'm 19 and currently enrolled in my 3rd different college. Granted, not everyone chooses to transition that much, but it is frustrating. Being told that everything that is discussed in school is absolutely necessary later in life. Screw that. I'd like trade schools, where we learn what we need to learn, and not everything the human race has discovered since the beginning of our existence. I'll say at the age of 32, I've never had to solve for the area under a curve. That if I want to be part of the popular group at my school, I need to be rich, smoke a lot, and drink a lot. Pro tip, there's no such thing as a popular group unless you make one out to be. They're just a group of people who enjoy each other's company, like you enjoy your friends' company. They have similar interests like you and your friends do. They aren't special. Why look up to them? Mood swings. What's that? You're in a great mood? Well, I'm gonna kick your heart in the balls for no apparent reason. Have fun overanalyzing every tiny aspect of yourself. Again, this is something that might never go away. Your entire life is online friends and relationships. You're a nerd or loser or whatever at age 14. People can track that back at age 24. It's ridiculous and kind of sad. People spend way too much time worrying about making their social media persona so big that they lose sight of the relationships in front of them. You never really know someone. This is one thing I will say is social media was nowhere near as big a thing when I was in high school as it is now. I can only imagine the added crap that goes along with that. I'm a virgin by choice. Most of my other friends have had quite a bit of sex. I get crap because I want to wait to lose my virginity with someone I've been dating for at least a couple of years, because I want it to mean something. My friends had a competition over spring break to see who could screw the most girls in a week, and they don't understand why I don't want to be like them. Education is incredibly expensive, and yet we're lazy or whatever for not attending college. A lot of kids in my graduating class don't give a crap anymore because they know they can't afford the higher education they want. All a lot of us care about at this point is graduating. We aren't given many options. Personally, learning to be a man without my father being there to guide me and teach me how. He passed away when I was 13. Aside from that, it's the overall standards that I'm being held up to. I'm the youngest child in my family, and my brother and sister both graduated high school with honors and are off pursuing great things. Then there's me. I'm just different from them. A freshman in high school who lives with a mom that just doesn't get that I see things and do things differently. Their knowledge is in books, and mine is in the sheets of music. I hate feeling like that makes me useless. I know I'm not the only one who feels this way. The standards are what's hurting a lot of teens. The fact that teenagers exist as some sort of pseudo-protected class and are hardly expected to be able to wipe their own butts, let alone make intelligent life decisions. There's a systematic lack of responsibility held by teenagers in our society such that any driven, motivated individual is aberrant. For the entirety of human history, people past the age of 14 or 15 were treated as responsible adults, but nowadays, many are coddled well into their 20s. I think it leaves people unable to ultimately become responsible members of society, and it's managed to create a positive feedback loop. Society doesn't give teenagers responsibility, so they become irresponsible, making society view them as unable to hold responsibility, and to withdraw even more. The expectations placed upon the average teenager typically involves not getting wasted or high on school nights and avoiding trouble with the police. Good grades are nice too, but maybe you can't manage to do your homework because you're meant for better things. This, instead of a system that existed even until the early 20th century. Make your way in the world or get left behind. I don't advocate a return to this system, but I do believe that more responsibility needs to be placed on young adults in order to foster their development into effective members of society. This is true. If you want them to be able to take responsibility, you need to trust them with some. The fact that it takes a bachelor's degree to babysit ticks me off. I'm trying to find a summer job and I can't get anything because I have no experience. But how do I get experience if I can't start anywhere? The fact that I'm 19 and get put in a group with 14 and 15-year-olds. Also, my senior year of high school, I had to ask to go to the bathroom. Now in college, no one gives a crap, and I'm solely responsible for myself. How does high school prepare me for college again? School is basically pointless, and going to college doesn't guarantee you the ultimate high-paying 9-to-5 anymore. Just because I know people will be like, your education is important, school is very good. Shut up. Learning is what's important. And that doesn't go on a whole lot in school anymore. And I know this gets said a lot by kids that slack in school to excuse themselves for being lazy and stupid, but I'm an AB student and I agree that a grade doesn't define anyone's intelligence. Yet, grades are all that's supposed to matter to kids these days. It's really pretty stupid, especially considering how little most college degrees do for us nowadays. The people suck. My bio teacher would put my classmates and myself down every day. People would report her all the time, and nothing happened. Finally, one day, I was like, I'm done. I'm making it stop. I recorded her on my phone, which is apparently called unlawful wiretap, yet I was in a public setting. Anyway, I caught so much stuff that she even downright refused to teach us anymore. Yeah, some kids in the class didn't always pay attention, but what she did was way overboard. She got suspended until we left her class. She took me to court. Since I didn't have a malicious intent, I get to go on a lovely program called diversion. I have to basically be on probation until November, and I have to do 30 hours of community service. All because I recorded my teacher to show the administration. I've never been in any sort of trouble. The school cop even got a good word out about me. I actually tried to be decent to this teacher, even though I hated her. And now she's talking crap about me. So much so that someone from my mom's job said that she called us degenerates. Just childish. And she's supposed to be the adult. One day, I got a large door jammed between my toes and punched a kid in the face, and he let it go. In that situation, I was definitely in the wrong and got nothing. The one where I feel I did the right thing, I got punished. I just hate people. This is just unfortunate to hear, honestly. It's the administration that should be doing something about the teacher that's causing problems. And you shouldn't get in trouble for doing what was necessary to prove to them that this was going on when they weren't doing their jobs properly to begin with. I hate the stereotyping of teenagers. People think all teenagers are obsessed with is swag and Instagram. Me and a lot of other teenagers are not like that. I also don't like when adults think my points are invalid because I'm 14. There are absolutely 14-year-olds with more common sense than people in their 30s, and sometimes you need to acknowledge that. The amount of general expectations of you, at least in the US, everyone who wants to succeed has to play 3 sports, play a musical instrument, get a 4.0 GPA, do way too many hours of community service, and still get 10 hours of sleep a night. I call bull on that. How being smart is frowned upon by other teenagers. Seriously, how often do you see reading or actually being intelligent as something a cool person does? No, they're always smoking and partying and drinking at age 15, and stupid things like that. In a few years, you're going to come to learn that the word cool doesn't mean what you think it means. Reddit, what are some college majors that should definitely be avoided? If you're a journalism major, getting involved in student publications and media is way more important than classes. Journalists aren't hired based off their degree, but how well acclimated they are to newsrooms, deadlines, and things like that. You can't learn the trade in a classroom, only in the field. Classes are just to help you refine your skills and the little things. Standalone language majors. How are you, a student learning a language in less than 4 years, going to compete with a bilingual speaker who also has skills for the workforce? You have to pair it with something else. If you want to major in a language, you double major. I was looking for this one. I cannot tell you how many people major in a language without studying abroad and think they're going to be able to move to that country and work there. I did German and linguistics, double major, and am doing my master's in Germany with the intention of teaching English as a second language. Some of my friends just majored in French or German and planned on moving over here and getting any kind of job. This isn't something I've ever thought about, but makes a lot of sense when you lay it out like that. General studies. Just pick a major. Being undecided all 4 years won't look great on your first resume unless you leave undergrad with some amazing experience that translates into an immediate position. I was a history major. 'Twas fun, but no money. Now I'm a zookeeping major. Tons more fun and even less money. If you don't plan on getting at least a master's degree, avoid psychology. I've known several servers, bartenders, and receptionists that have their degree in psychology, even a few that have ended up in retail. Not that I look down on those jobs, just that they clearly don't require a psychology degree. To get a job in the field, you pretty much need to have a master's at least. Art history. My current roommate, out of college now, was an art history major. She doesn't do any art herself, she just really likes art. Spends a lot of her weekends going to museums and galleries. She can't find a job in what she wants to do. Has an entry-level position as an office administrator, and she hates it. She can't really move up much in her company because she doesn't have the knowledge of the industry she's in. She went to a private university for it, and will be paying off loans for a long time. This is one that before even coming to this thread, I heard was a rough one to try and get a job with. Be careful when studying music. Most universities offer music performance and music education. Getting a bachelor's in music education means you're certified to teach at a school, and therefore has a lot more potential of getting you a job. Music performance just means you got really good at playing your instrument. You'll still have job options such as giving lessons, starting your own studio, joining a professional symphony, or just being a freelance musician. But those all have varying levels of difficulty and instability. For example, to get into a symphony, you have to be the best of the best, at least for top-tier symphonies. So your probability of being hired depends solely on your audition. And to be a freelance musician means that there may be periods where you're unemployed. And even when you are hired by someone, you'll go most of the time without insurance or a retirement fund. And then you have to factor in the location you're in. If you're in an area that's musically dry, you won't be finding any paying gigs unless you're a teacher. There may be plenty of people wanting your services like churches, community bands, and musical pit orchestras, but you probably won't get paid. Yeah, unfortunately, artists and musicians have it rough nowadays, especially based on your area. Non-accredited majors. Even if it sounds like a good degree, mechanical engineering for example, it might not be accredited, meaning it doesn't hold anywhere near the value. I'm only using mechanical engineering as an example. This is normally an issue with university programs that are new, which means that their program normally wouldn't have accreditation. It would be in the application process. It's quite the gamble when you're a new student, because if they don't get accreditation by the time you graduate, you're SOL. Yeah, that would be the last thing you want, is to waste a whole bunch of money on a class that literally means nothing to anyone. Biology. Unless you want to go to med/farm/vet school or graduate school. A BS in biology won't get you very far, and you'll max out in earning potential early on. A lot of bio majors go back for their MS or PhD because they're stuck at low pay scale. If you already know that's what you want to do, you're fine. Make sure you do a BS and not a BA though. Don't do something you dislike because you think it's a good career path. Work is going to be a major part of your life, so aiming for something you can't stand doing is a bad idea. I'm fighting with that sort of. I decided to major in something I love, but I hate it now because it's becoming a career instead of a hobby. The career I want is generally lower pay, but I'd rather major in that because I'd actually be happy. This is the conflict I think a lot of college students go through. There's the thing that you want to do, but you kind of don't want to do it as a job because then you won't want to do it anymore. Versus the thing that you don't want to do, but it pays really well. I don't know. It's a tough decision to make either way. My last job was at a gas station chain, and I met at least 3 hourly gas station managers who had biology master's degrees. Blew my mind that they were attempting to pay down $120,000 worth of loans on $20 an hour. Everyone I know with a bio or biochem master's is employed in research or by private firms. What the heck were your coworkers doing? Criminal justice. It seems to be the new default major for people who don't actually know what they want to do now that psychology is out of vogue. I work at a courthouse and I never graduated college. Most of the new people are trying to get in with criminal justice degrees because it'll look good on their resume, and there are a ton of people applying with that major. Very competitive. Criminal justice sounds like something that would be useful if you're going for something in the law field, but maybe not? I don't know. It's not always just about the major, but what else you do in school. I got my degree in anthropology, which as a bachelor's doesn't mean much in itself. But I managed to get into courses where I did actual research and got my name co-published in a couple professional journals. That was something I've been able to market to employers as much, if not more, than the degree. Same thing goes for something often badmouthed, like women's studies. I have 2 close friends who went that route and are both employed in careers. Women's studies, not STEM, prepared them to go on to get social work degrees, which is where they now make their living. Agreed. An in-demand major helps, but doesn't mean jack if you don't put in the work to network and intern. A crappy degree held by someone who did internships for at least the latter half of their education will be looked at better than a good degree holder with no experience. So, incoming college goers, intern, network, schmooze. Yeah, I think more and more places are going routes like this. Your college degree doesn't exactly mean a whole lot. Everyone wants experience. Or if you've managed to get an internship somewhere, then you've already gotten your foot in the door. Problem with internships is a lot of the time you're working for free for a while without a guaranteed job at the end of it. Unless you eat, sleep, and breathe architecture, do not even consider it as a major. You'll spend more money, more sleepless nights, and more of your sanity than any other student. Unless you have the passion necessary to make those sacrifices, forget it. Learn from my mistakes. I just finished a dual master's in architecture and urban design. Everything you said 100%, except now that I'm out and working, there was indeed light at the end of the tunnel. I feel bad talking crap about my own degree, but biomedical engineering. Maybe not avoid it, but make sure you have an idea of what you like at the beginning or early as possible, and tailor your work experience, classes, and training to that speciality. For example, if you like prosthetics, have things that show you're ready to compete with mechanical and electrical engineers over the same position, and that your biology and anatomy knowledge gives you an edge over them. All other engineers have obvious fields they can go into. Biomed is simply just not as flushed out, and employees may just pick grads with majors they fully understand. In my undergrad, I went more of the bioinformatics route and did a lot of coding, so I load up my resume with that stuff, and had 2 internships that furthered my coding ability. But would it have been easier if I just did computer engineering? Possibly. Avoid any major starting with pre-law, pre-med, anything like that. I know several people who became doctors with degrees in chemistry, biology, or engineering. I also know someone who finished pre-med, went to med school, realized he didn't want to be a doctor, and was screwed. He ended up spending 4 years getting a second bachelor's degree. Likewise, you can easily get a law degree and become a lawyer with degrees in all sorts of things. You can't do anything else with a pre-law degree. Criminal justice. I'm about 2 months away from having my AA in criminal justice, but every law enforcement professional I met said don't waste your time getting your bachelor's in criminal justice. Get it in something practical like business or engineering. So if God forbid something happens to you, then you have a degree in something else to fall back on. I want to be a police officer, by the way. That's the second time this one's come up. Maybe that is one to avoid. Don't do a business major if even the smallest amount of math freaks you out. Even in things that aren't accounting or finance, you'll still have to do a little bit in most entry-level positions. I feel like that one's kind of a given. If you're gonna be in business, you're gonna be handling numbers. Graphic design. The market is oversaturated with designers. Design is very subjective. No matter what jargon pro designers may throw at you about color theory and the golden ratio, when it comes down to you finding a job, it's all about if the employer likes what they see. The current industry is being devalued by sites like Fiverr and 99 Designs, where companies will pay pennies to get a logo or a flyer made. This makes companies not value or need in-house designers. Design agencies are very stuck up, and the culture is almost always cutthroat. The pay sucks. Depending on your city, the entry-level pay can fluctuate, but you'll be making nowhere near the money you could with other forms of education. You most likely will not be doing what you love unless you get lucky. If you become an in-house designer, be prepared to only design stuff related to whatever your company specializes in for the rest of your employment there. If you're hired at an agency, you'll have more opportunities to work on different brands, but may not be the brands you're interested in. If you don't like a crap ton of physics, or if you're not at least somewhat into it, don't go into lucrative engineering fields, because there's a very high chance you'll switch out. If you're in it only for the money, there's a big wake-up call heading for you. Again, engineering, you're gonna be doing a lot of math, gotta be prepared for that. First of all, almost every major is useless if you can't show employers what you learned with it, i.e. internships, publications, research, papers and projects beyond what is expected of a college assignment, and things like that. Also, you may have the risk of making your degree useless if you want to stay in a certain area. In doing so, you're limiting your job prospects in that industry. For example, you major in art history, but there's only one art museum in the state and you don't want to leave the state. Secondly, most majors themselves have some degree of usefulness. Supposedly useless majors such as philosophy, history, and psych can be great prep for an advanced grad school degree like pre-law or other intensive writing and research degrees. Others, like English, classics, and journalism, show that you can write well, which is always valuable and can lead to jobs in copywriting, editing, and things like that. That being said, there are some degrees I would not recommend getting. Sports management for one. Coming from someone that worked at the highest levels of athletics, a sports management degree is useless. While there are jobs in sports, they just require you to grind and they're really competitive to get. I know for a fact that hiring managers don't give a crap about what degree you have, except for maybe like athletic training. They just care about your experience. So sports management itself doesn't get you hired, and it eliminates career options if a career in sports doesn't work out. It's also getting a rep that it's an easy major, in which I agree is the case with about 98% of sports management programs. Again, going to what I said earlier using the art history example, probably isn't a great idea to major in sports management if you attend a small private NAIA school in the middle of Iowa. Other useless majors include dance or ballet if you have a bad knee or back, and African American studies from North Carolina. Google UNC academic scandal. Sometimes you do need to use a little bit of common sense. I've seen a lot of people saying foreign language unless you double major. Nobody has yet mentioned that Japanese isn't a happy life, period. There's literally thousands of other Westerners pining for that English teaching job in Japan, and they treat you like dirt when you get there. I'm sure I could name like half a dozen people off the top of my head that would love a job like that. In the UK, if you can afford not to, don't do law. Many law firms I stumbled across prefer non-law rigorous degrees, linguistics, maths, and hard science, and a conversion to law afterwards. If you get good enough grades, you might be able to get your degrees for free because some firm or inn of court will pay for it. If you want to do IP law, just do science. Whatever area of science you graduate from is the area that you can do patents. Also, you can work in the patents office. If you don't want to do law, you'll always get asked the question as to why you studied law and you're not working in law, as I got when I was trying to get a job in PR. Finally, if you want to be a solicitor, forget the LPC. A new super exam came out in 2020, and you won't need to spend 10 to 20k on the LPC to qualify. You will, however, need 2 years work experience, so get that now. Again, another example, everyone just wants you to have experience. They feel you learn more from actually doing the job than from learning about the job. Don't go to college, period, unless you know what you want to do. We've been looking at this all wrong. Start with where you want to be in 10 to 15 years, and then work backwards. What's between you and that place? If college is one of those things, then go to college. Looking at it the wrong way is how we've ended up with $1 trillion in student loan debt. Don't just go to college for the sake of going to college. It would literally be cheaper to travel around the world, and you'd learn more. This is something I completely agree with. This is something I've said before too. Figure out where you want to be and work backwards from there. Then start towards your goal. Graphic design. Honestly, a decent major. Just make sure you take it somewhere you'll have passionate professors and not ones that just link you to a YouTube tutorial. It's easy to teach yourself graphic design rather than dish out like $40,000 to learn it. As someone who's currently enrolled, I definitely agree. Although there is some expectations for students to solve design problems on their own, I think. Professors can only give you the building blocks, not the answer. Second time graphic design came up, and that does sound like a really cool one to work in. Sounds like the way to go is maybe learn yourself online and just start making a portfolio. Anthropology. Last I heard, they crank out about 3,000 master's degrees a year, while there are about 300 job openings per year in the field. Most people, I would say, don't do anthropology to be an anthropologist. A relative got an anthropology degree at 45 and used it to go into financial counseling. There are no bad majors, only bad planning. Your degree doesn't matter in getting a job as much as the grades you get and the work experience you get during the summer. Of course, if you want to do an actual profession, and I mean a profession like medicine, law, or engineering, you do need the requisite degree and good grades and good work experience. Save again for the caveat above, no one really expects you to do anything with what you learned at bachelor's level. What the degree is supposed to do is advertise your abilities and skills. Whether we like it or not, employers will look at academic ability as a key indicator of how trainable and employable you are. Many people downplay the value of good internships and work experience. Yes, a lot of terrible places don't pay at all, but unfortunately, the market is that you need to have experience. You can ask, how could a history major work at an iBank? It's not what you learn from a book, but the skills, analytical, critical thinking, and things like that. It also shows good motivation, planning, and goals. I know many people who did useless degrees who were in some good, non-related jobs. What they did right was good grades, good work experience, and good planning. Unless you're getting into a specialized field, a degree is what a high school diploma was 30 years ago. I'm getting a degree in something I enjoy, philosophy, because everywhere I'd like to work requires something. I don't expect to make a lot, but I expect to make more than I would have without it. It might be easier for me to say this as a Canadian though. Tuition is only around $8,000 with textbooks where I live. My goal is to get my degree and find some office jobs until I land something I like. I just want a clock in, clock out kind of thing. It's easier to have these goals for myself though, since I don't want kids. Other people might have to be more concerned about their finances and earning potential. This is one way to handle it. You get a degree for relatively cheap that's gonna end you a job that pays you well, and you go from there until you find something that you really want to do for the rest of your life. Unless you have future plans for grad school or a specific career path you're dead set on, in my opinion, it doesn't matter. Picking something broad like sciences, econ, tech-based, or communications works great. I spent many years past 4 because I thought my major would dictate the rest of my life. It doesn't. You can always go back to community college for a class or two if you want something extra for a specific position you're applying for. Most jobs are entry level and just want to see a bachelor's degree and provide on-the-job training. Doing sales for any company requires knowledge of their specific CRM system, sales approaches, their product that you would never get a major in. One major I have had friends struggle with post-graduation job searching is English, unless they went into teaching or writing a book. If you major in the pure sciences, chem, physics, or biology, you'll have no career in your field without a PhD. And if you're smart enough to complete a PhD in those fields, you're smart enough to do something easier and better paying. I myself got off the research plantation and moved into technical sales when I realized how little of a future there was in chemistry, and my wife moved to statistics and data science. It really sucks to hear that people put in so much time and money into something that they think they're going to be passionate about for the rest of their lives, only to lose that passion or struggle to find a job, or get a job that doesn't pay enough, and they're just in crippling debt for years. What did your school waste money on that nobody liked? They made a huge screen with 4 plasma screens and put it in a very random place in a random building hall. All 4 just constantly said no signal and nothing else. Name tags. Shortly after Columbine and all those other shootings peaked in frequency, it was supposed to keep outsiders from getting in the school unnoticed and shooting everyone. But at the time, people doing the shootings were always students, so we joked that they were bulletproof. This does sound like one of those decisions that was made in response to something happening in current events, and maybe wasn't exactly thought through all the way. Some of my classmates won a bunch of money for our school. Our school was one of the lowest funded schools in the district. The district took the money and spent it on another school. Maybe that school needed it more or needed it for something really important, but yeah, either way, that doesn't seem fair on surface level. The large schoolyard at my school had a set of planters in the center. There were basically 4 triangles made of brick that pointed in at each other and created an X-shaped walkway between. The outside sides had a bench each attached. People would sit and chat to each other on the benches, teachers and students alike. There was very little litter or vandalism. The plants were kinda pretty insofar as any secondary schooler would care to notice. One year, a duck made her nest in one of the planters, and apart from a few few, "oh, hey, a duck nest" comments, it was left alone. Then, for some reason, the school decided to rip the planners out. Took them 2/3 of the school year to do it, and blocked off the X walkways so everyone had to crush by on the outside lanes between classes. Everyone was super curious as to what the planners would be replaced by. Turns out, nothing. They simply bricked over the holes left by the planners and left it as a huge empty space. We didn't even get new benches, so no one had anywhere to sit during break. People started to miss the plants since the lack of color left the whole area kinda bland. We also kept to the old X walkway since stepping over the former plants felt weirder. This seems like one of those times where it's just like, why? What was the issue? You spent a lot of time and money to just take something away that was nice? iPads for the kindergarten. They were intended to have educational apps on them that kids could play on at indoor recess. Believe it or not, most kindergartners would rather play on the swings or play with dolls than learn to write their name on an app. No one used them, no one liked them, and they all broke within 2 months. Yeah, that sounds like a waste of money if I ever heard one. I was on a boys' varsity soccer team in high school. The new head coach wanted to emphasize a more analytical approach, and as such had Booster Club buy a $10,000 goalpost camera. None of the team liked the idea anyway, especially since the girls' soccer team used their money for new jerseys and nicer balls, and they still made it farther in their playoffs than we did almost every year. As it turns out, the coach couldn't figure out how to put the camera together, and we never used it. Biggest waste of $10,000 I've ever seen. I'm sure there was a much cheaper option he probably could have gone for. Trash cans with the school logo on them and banners. They tried hyping us up about new trash cans on the morning show. At my school, they took away some of the tables in the cafeteria until we kept it cleaner. We just sat on the floor instead. When 65-inch TVs were like 4K a pop, they set about 8 of them around campus that just displayed the time. $4,000 clocks. Not to mention whatever they used as a video source to send to the display. This makes no sense to me that you would make an investment like this and then not make proper use of it. What is wrong with people? You can do so much more than just show the time. Be creative, come on. My high school purchased a vending machine that only contained Swerve. What is Swerve, you ask? Carbonated milk. Again, who's in charge of these ideas? A 3D printer that the teachers won't learn how to use, so now nobody's allowed to use it. My school got 4 of those, and the teacher responsible for them actually encouraged us to take the SolidWorks course to learn about 3D design. It was actually a lot of fun, and I still have some of the objects I created. Goes to show, a lot of the times it comes down to the person doing the teaching. They have to have some enthusiasm. A memorial tree was planted for a girl who was killed right before graduation by her family and friends. The school allowed it, and there was a beautiful Japanese maple tree there for like 10 years. Apparently they just cut it down and had no reason why. Everyone was pretty ticked off, especially the family. My son's current school sent out an email to parents announcing that they'd like to add voice projection to every class. He's in 1st grade and there are 20 kids in his class. Totally unnecessary. They had a demo session and it sounded horrible. My high school teacher got these midway through my junior year, and they sucked. The range wasn't great, and the receiver in one classroom would pick up the microphone in another, and the battery life was awful, so the teachers rarely used it. The best thing that they were used for was the one time that my teacher noticed a kid in the room across the hall was asleep in class. They were watching a video and the other teacher had stepped out of the room for a moment. They walked over to the door so that the other room's receiver would pick up his mic and said, "Wake up!" and then closed his door. This really does sound like a waste of money unless you specifically have a kid who has a hearing disability or something. And in that case, normally they have something that is individual to them that connects to their hearing aid and the teacher has a microphone so that they can hear them better. Not something that needs to be projected to the whole class. When I was still a student, my school spent almost $200,000 to paint the road outside our school. You read that right. Almost $200,000 of our precious tuition dollars to paint the roads outside blue and yellow. To pour salt on this painful wound, the paint job didn't even make it through winter. Just to reiterate, $200,000 for 3 months of painted road. I think I'm still angry about it. Who would hear that cost and decide, yeah, that sounds like a good investment? My high school wasted a ton of money buying 2 golf carts. Their reasoning was it allowed staff to get to any dangerous scenes faster, except we never had any accidents and they were mostly used for joyrides by the hall monitors. You know what? This one I can kinda get behind. It's not some $200,000 expense and they got used and you had a little fun along the way. One of the schools in our district paid an astronomical fee to an artist to create artwork for the hall of the school, paid for the dude's room and board for like a year, and he produced a large polished piece of wood. No, literally, that's it. It was supposed to be shaped like a heart, but looks more like a butt, and is now known as the Bart. I'm sorry, but sometimes I do think that modern art is just ridiculous and a ripoff. My school just spent tens of millions of dollars on a remodel that includes a new commons and front office area, which were not needed, but no new classrooms, which were desperately needed. The old commons was warm, inviting, bright, and beautiful. It wasn't old. The new commons is dark, cold, sterile, and uninviting. The exterior was changed too. The entire front of the school used to be attractive. Now it looks like a prison. I think maybe the architect presented the design as a joke, but our principal liked it, so the architect just rolled with it. It never fails that when a school gets some money, they spend it on the staff and not the students. They cut out welding, machine shop, wood shop, and graphic design to buy a $1 million scoreboard for football. Honestly, there's way too much value put onto sports. Everything that was listed sounds way more valuable to learn than to be able to look at a scoreboard. Our mascot was a rocket, and a certain percentage of school construction money had to be spent on art. They spent $90,000 commissioning a giant rocket sculpture for the main field entrance. When it was unveiled, the artist had made one tiny change to the design. Instead of a pointy rocket tip, he'd gone with a rounded, mushroom tip. I mean, we thought it was hilarious, especially when they cut off the tip as their solution to the problem. But nobody liked it. I'm sorry. Did they circumcise the rocket? My school invested in 8-year-old Chromebooks that die in like 30 minutes. Again, not willing to invest in what the students actually need, and just going for the cheapest, crappiest thing they can find. I'm a teacher. My first year, the school leader bought a ping pong table for the lounge in an attempt to make the school more fun and relaxing. It simply became a surface to put copies on. You know what? This one sounds like it's more of a people around you situation. You guys could be having fun with it, but you're choosing not to. That's on you, not them. Besides, tables themselves can get pretty expensive. At least this one you can play with if you want. My son's elementary school PTO had an excess of funds. They decided to put it on a buddy bench. A buddy bench is a bench where you can sit on if you want a buddy. In theory, it sounded like a decent idea, except that it was placed in the hallway near the office and none of the kids wanted to be identified as someone who didn't have a friend. Nobody ever sits on it. I agree that the theory of the buddy bench is nice, but in practicality, it's probably not going to get used. This wasn't common knowledge, so I was the only one really ticked off by it, but I worked for Cisco Foods as a baker at a university, and the upper echelons of the administration had hired their own personal pastry chef to make these extravagant desserts for their meetings. This pastry chef was legit. She made absolutely amazing desserts of a wide variety every day, loaded them onto the cart, and with her baker's outfit and hat on would wheel it up to their daily administration meetings. Her salary was paid for by the students of the school, so that the administrators could dine on first-class pastries and desserts made from scratch each day. She was really good at her job and actually helped me improve in the bakery. But I was so mad that her job even existed simply to provide pastries to people who just sat around and decided how the school's money was spent. I obviously didn't make a stink about it to anyone because she was my friend, and I would never dream of putting her employment at risk. But I couldn't help feeling like her entire career was to make fat cats fatter, and it just boiled my blood. Okay, this is the first story that has genuinely ticked me off in how money is being spent. Just random TVs in the hallway that showed slideshows and crap. Tens of thousands of dollars when we could have just put up bulletin boards. My school had loads of TVs that I don't recall ever seeing turned on. Seems like there might be a trend in the TV area here. They installed cameras in nearly every inch of the school, not for student safety, but because the school board didn't trust the kids. My school was miles behind other high schools. Old textbooks and sometimes not enough textbooks. Computers were junk, no in-school programs. They spent every ounce of money on cameras and putting the rest in the school board's pockets. I really feel like these places need to be more strongly audited for stuff like this. My high school spent a bunch of money on this system to play popular songs for the last minute of passing time between classes. So we'd hear popular music and as a convenient way to know to get to your next class. Then they started playing Friday by Rebecca Black every Friday. Once. Then it was the only song on Fridays. Then it was the only song. Every day, 5 times a day. Thank God that was my senior year. No idea if they still do it. My God, I hope not. I'm sure the kids would be rioting. My school's mascot was a knight, and it was rumored that the school had the choice of installing a pool at the high school or to commission a large 25-foot-long metal sculpture of a knight on a horse, and to hang it from the ceiling in the back hallway. They opted for the horse. My guess on this one is they didn't want the long-term maintenance cost of the pool. They bought flags of all the states and put them around this caged-in area full of gravel. They caged in the gravel to stop students from walking across the gravel. They also bought flags in the school's color to line the fence around campus. Only thing is, we were in an area which can get very windy with 0 windshield, so those flags took a beating. By mid-year, they were an ugly frayed mess. My school spent $30,000 from 2 years of fundraising on an LED billboard about 10 feet off of a major road. It was so bright that it caused several accidents at night and had to be shut down about 8 months later because it was deemed a safety hazard. I hung out with several of the guys on the programming team and they figured out how to upload memes onto it. They couldn't figure out who did it, so no one got in trouble. In 2011, my college spent $32,000 to have Snooki come in as an inspirational speaker in some misguided attempt to connect with freshmen. Around the same time, there was a growing student-led movement to make the school more affordable. The student board revolted. People confronted her during her speech. It was a glorious mess. I think anyone who finds Snooki to be inspirational doesn't need to be encouraged. I went to a Catholic high school. Very few of the students were actually Catholic and went there because the local public school district was terrible. We won some contest or grant and the school said they would allow the students to pick what the money was spent on. The options were new flooring for the gym, renovate the courtyard next to the chapel into a prayer garden, or renovating the courtyard next to the cafeteria into an outdoor eating space. Most people voted for new gym floors, and some people voted for the outdoor eating space. I don't know of anyone who voted for the prayer garden. Guess what won? The prayer garden. People, even teachers, were furious, as the voting was clearly rigged to give us the appearance of a choice. If they really wanted a prayer garden, they should have just done the work without putting it to a vote. The funny thing about the prayer garden is that they actually made it nice and put in benches and plants and whatnot, but it was always locked and never used. Administration would often say during tours, "Oh, look at our lovely prayer garden for students. They voted for it." No, we didn't. Wait, the church used the money on themselves? No. i7 workstation laptops with Quadro GPUs, easily $2,500 each, for an elementary school, kindergarten through grade 6. Those machines were designed for CAD work and media production, but were instead solely used for web browsing and Microsoft Word. I don't have any idea why they bought them. Okay, so earlier we were talking about 8-year-old Chromebooks. This school has decided to go to the complete opposite end of the spectrum. These are laptops that should be available to university students who are studying like 3D rendering and things like that. This really goes to show that the people who decide where the money goes don't have any idea what they're doing. Laminated ID cards that everyone had to wear around their necks on some dorky lanyard. No one did it, so they made it punishable by detention. After that, half the students still didn't do it, and the detention hall became so overwhelmed that they began to make backlogs. After a few weeks, not wearing it gave you a detention 2 months from then. Eventually, detention became so backlogged that students started doing more severe transgressions, because they would have graduated before they could actually be forced to go go to detention. After about a month of this, no one had to wear their ID cards at all anymore. They said it was for security purposes so no one could sneak into the school. The thing is, you could literally put anything in the lanyard and no one would check if it was your actual student ID card. I had a blank index card in mine and no one ever said anything to me. If someone actually wanted to sneak into the school, all they would need is a lanyard and no one would ever check if it's actually authentic or not. Like, what's the point? You're gonna sit there and enforce detention that aggressively because you need to flex your power over the students, but you're not gonna enforce the actual safety aspect that you're trying to argue that it's there for in the first place? Guys, this thread's really getting to me. Our school paid to cover a huge lot with cement just to have a ceremony on it announcing a new building. Then they tore it up 2 months later to start construction. My school fees went towards having nice cement for press pictures. What a joke. My school wasted so much money on plastic ID cards that you were supposed to scan into every room to assure you were there, and the IDs were also keys to get into the buildings. If you didn't have your card, you couldn't get in, and also got in-school suspension. It wasn't a bad system because you could easily take a photo of your ID to scan into rooms, but you'd have to bum a buddy to get into a building. But once there were internet problems, the whole system would shut down, and living in a rural wheat town, you could expect wind and rain and tornadoes and all of that fun stuff. My college spent $2,000 on a conference table. It made national headlines. This just reminds me of that scene from Community. When I went to college, the local NFL team paid for the school to go from a grass field to artificial turf. The school never said it was only half paid for by the team. My siblings had a whole year without paper, printers, no raises for staffs, cutting school programs, and they slashed the art budget. The football team still got new uniforms that year though. How are you going to put so much value on your football team? Come on, give the rest of the students what they need. My town got a brand new middle school, and somehow they spent $40,000 on a giant metal palm tree that they called the Learning Tree. One of the chair people essentially commissioned it from a relative. So many of us were ticked off. It didn't even have lights, and there was no way to clean it, so it just sat there like the giant waste of money it was collecting dust. Well, we liked it at first, not so much after. I followed a product development study and we got a fancy industry-grade laser cutter in our workplace. Then after a couple of people were able to use it, the teacher decided it needed cleaning. She proceeded to use a toothpick to shove it into the nozzle where the laser comes out, damaging the mirror inside the machine. We had this thing for less than a week. 2 years later I graduated, and as far as I know, that thing is still broken. Those lasers are incredibly expensive and powerful. What do you think was stuck in there that you could get out with a toothpick that the laser couldn't get out itself? When I started secondary school, we had a canteen with proper home-style food being served. Cooked fresh, real meat and vegetables, and good portion sizes. All the students loved it, and it was well used. The school decided to replace this with a fast food style setup with processed burgers and fries to try to appeal to the kids, and up the prices too. Within a month, nobody visited the canteen anymore. Practically every kid in the school started bringing food from home. It took 3 months till they changed everything back again. Massive expense for absolutely no reason. It was already very successful as it was. Why mess with a good thing? You just wanted to get cheaper food in there and charge more, didn't you? Teachers of Reddit, what's the funniest reason you've had to send someone to the principal's office? Not entirely the principal's office because they were kindergartners, but 2 boys turned off the lights in the bathroom, had their pants around their ankles, chasing each other around in the dark and peeing on each other. That was a weird one to explain to the parents. I work at a daycare and we couldn't figure out why the bathroom smelled like pee so bad even though it gets cleaned twice a day. After a few days, one of the teachers was tying a boy's shoes when she looked into the bathroom and saw another boy peeing directly into the floor drain. Apparently half the class was peeing down the drain instead of into the toilet. Unfortunately enough for young kids, peeing is funny, and they tend to go places with that. A kid dropped a folder full of Xeroxed copies of his hairy butt. Turns out he'd been taping them to people's lockers all over school. Maybe someone told him he had a nice butt and he felt obliged to share it with the rest of the world. My dad worked as a teacher in a school for misguided youth. On the first day, he wrote his name on the board as new teachers do, and when he turned his back towards the class, a kid had lit his desk on fire with hairspray and was just laughing. 3-foot-high flame no more than a foot away from him. I had a 6th grader who was, just to paint the picture, a human incarnation of Ralph Wiggum, who wanted to get out of class so desperately that first he raised his hand and said his ears were ringing and he needed to go to the nurse. Sorry kid, not falling for it. 20 seconds later, he raised his hand and said his tongue was burning and needed to go to the nurse. Not falling for it, Ralph. 10 seconds later, he had blurry vision. He was squishing his eyes with his hands. No dice, kid. And then, in the grand finale, he stands with a flourish and yells so loud that teachers all down the hall stuck their heads out into the hallway. My dong is bleeding! We all stood mouths agape until the one wise guy in the class adds, "And you want the nurse to look at it?" What did this kid have to get out of class so bad for that he felt the need to yell that to everybody? I didn't send him to the office, but one of my favorite moments was one time I was working with a small group while other students worked on independent stuff around the room. One student was working pretty close to me and obviously made a mistake because he exclaimed, "Crap!" except he didn't say crap. So I said, "Excuse me, Ty? What was that?" And he says, "Oh, I didn't say what you think I said, miss." And I said, "Oh, good. What did you say?" He says, "I said shit," obviously thinking very hard. And then just stared at me horrified. I was trying so hard not to laugh, but I just told him, "I thought that's what you said. Please don't use that language in my classroom." We were doing sketch comedy in 6th grade a few years back, and seeing as it was a nice day, we went outside to practice. From across the field, I see one of my students very clearly and aggressively trying to put his junk on a prone classmate. When I asked him, he said it was for his sketch, and he was playing a character named the Iron Teabag. The best was the follow-up text from my boss saying, "I had to Google what teabagging was before I met with the kid." Sounds like they may have an instant classic on their hands. I had a kid show up to band with a massive black adult toy instead of his clarinet, and he honestly thought I wouldn't notice. Dude, everybody's gonna notice. Not a teacher, but a classmate in my drafting class was sent to the dean for 3D rendering a massive dong. My teacher saw it, commended him for his work, and asked him to print it out. He then stapled it to a referral and sent him to the dean. Glorious. Not a teacher, but we had an older lady as a science substitute in 8th grade. It was a hot June day and the windows were open. We were on the 2nd floor. My friend told the sub when she walked in the classroom that Jimmy had fallen out the window. When the sub looked out the window, she saw Jimmy lying on the ground contorted, and she passed out. We never got a chance to explain to her that it was a joke. He had just laid down on the sidewalk under the window. The 2 boys got suspended and that sub never came back. You guys probably left her with a very traumatic memory. I'm a male 5th grade teacher. One of my boys yelled out right before the 3:15 bell rang, "Everybody be quiet, I have a boner." I was like, did he just say that? The way he said it made me giggle like a schoolgirl. Luckily, no one noticed me turn and bust out laughing. No one else really seemed to notice what he had said. The bell rang to go home and I call him over. I asked him if he knew what that was. Very innocently, he said no. Then I thought, oh great. I could tell by his face that he wasn't lying. So I said, well, it's when your private parts get hard. Right when I said that, he got this very scared look on his face and said, I promise I didn't know that. Like I said, I could tell he wasn't lying. I had a very hard time keeping a straight face. He said his friend had yelled that out once, so he thought he would. I told him he can't say those kinds of things, and he has to be careful what he says. He walked away very embarrassed. I laughed and laughed when he left the room. Kids at that age be saying some crazy things without really knowing what they're talking about. A girl got so drunk that she locked herself in the bathroom. We found her and obviously had to call her parents to come take her home. We kept telling her, listen, it's your dean and you have to unlock the door. She kept responding in the horrible drunk teenager voice, now you listen, I'm your dean. It was very difficult for us to not break down in laughter. Stupid kids. Getting drunk at school doesn't exactly sound like a good time. Two of my 5th grade students were arguing on our way back to music class, so I went over to see why they were talking in line. I asked what was going on, and the first kid said that the other kid had called him gay. The second kid looked me straight in the eye and said, "I didn't call him gay, I called him a B word." I sent them on their way to the principal's office and sarcastically thanked them for the extra paperwork. I worked in a computer-based classroom at one point where the students took many of their classes online. Some of them tried to cheat the system by copying and pasting short phrases into all the fill-in-the-blank or essay responses, hoping it'd glitch and pass them through. Quickly discovered one student had been pasting homo 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 into all his responses, which backfired pretty well in one particular instance. Question: copy the words that apply to you. Answer: homo homo homo. I hope you marked them all incorrect except for that one. First year of high school, I got sent to the principal's office by my near-retirement teacher for breaking dress code with my t-shirt that had drug references and paraphernalia on it. The funny part was when my principal had to explain to my teacher that Billabong is a legitimate clothing company name, and nothing more. In 6th grade, during a school mass, my buddies made up a thing called Wiener Whack Wednesday. Self-explanatory. Go around nut-tapping everyone. Well, our really hot teacher caught 2 kids doing it, and we had a whole lecture our next period. She asked if any of us knew anything about it, and all the girls told the teacher what was up. Every single guy in our class, 15 at the time, small Catholic school, got called to the office. We had to take turns talking to the principal and explaining that none of us were gay. Then she made us call our parents. I was really freaking out that my father would think I was gay. I love how this is going on and that's their concern. Not the fact that y'all are just whipping it out and smacking each other with it, as long as you're not gay. Not a teacher, but saw a kid stand up in Russian class to do a speech on a topic of World War II Russia. He decided to do the whole speech on why Hitler was the greatest. Now, our teacher was born in Russia, grew up during the Soviet Union, and came to Minnesota to teach. She was horrified. If you think that the United States hates Hitler and Nazis the most, you've not studied Russia and World War II. I was glad, because this knucklehead and his douchey friends ruined Russian class for 4 years. I had this obnoxious, smarmy, show-offy 5th grader. One day, he was up to his usual tomfoolery, and a girl silently got up, opened the classroom pencil sharpener, and dumped the shavings all over the kid. I had to send her to the office, but it was a truly satisfying moment for the whole class. Sounds like she was willing to take one for the team there. I was covering another teacher's class in a computer lab, and we have a program called Net Support that basically allows you to spy on the kids' computers. It also serves some legitimate instructional purposes, like allowing you to take control of a kid's computer so you can demonstrate things. Only this teacher never used it, so I don't think the kids knew it existed. I normally don't use it because I don't like the Big Brother vibe it gives off, but there was a kid being a totally obnoxious jerk. He was looking up stupid and distracting videos and laughing loudly about them and making obnoxious comments to show off in front of his friends. I could have blocked YouTube, but instead I took control of his computer. I started typing in kitten videos into YouTube, My Little Ponies, anything that I could think of that wouldn't be cool for him or his friends. Then, every time he started to freak out and insist to his friends that he wasn't doing it, I gave him back control, and shortly after would take it away again. Then finally, I made a little pop-up come up on his screen that said, "I'm watching you." I expected him to figure out what was going on, but I think he got freaked out instead. It never seemed to occur to him that it was me, so I gave him control back and he did his work quietly for the rest of class. We had this in the engineering building. I was a teacher's assistant and this kid was playing some flash game rather than doing whatever design project he was supposed to be doing. So I would wait until just as he was about to beat a level and ever so slightly screw him up. He didn't know I had this ability, so he was getting crazy frustrated. Seeing him get visibly frustrated, I went over to his desk and said something along the lines of, "I know the program can be hard to learn. Let me see what you've got so far and I'll help." Oh, the shame he had when he turned high screen and didn't even have SolidWorks or whatever open. If I were you, I would have just kept messing with him for the rest of the day. I went to a small Catholic high school in the Seattle area. We had monthly Mass in our gym, and every year around Easter we did the Stations of the Cross. Mass was always brutal, but the stations lasted 2.5 hours or so. Unreal. A little background, I couldn't burp until I was in my early 20s. I have no clue why, but any built-up gas had only one exit. Growing up, I farted to the point that people thought I had a medical condition. People even called me Fart Boy. Anyway, it was my senior year and we were headed to the dreaded Stations of the Cross Mass. My friends and I had let one rip in class a number of times, but never during Mass. We always talked about doing it, but never mustered the courage. I decided about a week before that this would be the day. The Mass was set up where the choir would sing before each station. I think there were 11 or something, and then the priest would ramble on about its significance. Each time the choir stopped, there would be about 10 seconds of complete silence. We're on the 5th station and the choir is finishing when all of a sudden I unleashed a behemoth right as everything went silent. I was sitting on gym bleachers, which probably amplified the blast perfectly. I remember the guy in front of me inexplicably holding a yellow plastic screwdriver, and he dropped it. In shock or from the blast wave, we'll never know. My buddy and I proceeded to muffle our laughter for at least an hour until Mass ended. I've never tried to not laugh for that long before or since. Each time one of us would start to settle down, the other would release a cackle that started the whole process over again. We didn't even get in trouble. I'm sure the teachers thought it was an accident or never wanted to speak of it again. I'm laughing right now. One of my favorite memories. In high school, I got called into the principal's office. They put a screenshot of the Urban Dictionary entry for Cleveland Steamer in front of me and asked why I was looking at that. I laughed my butt off and said I was just doing some research and got sent back to class. Guys, I'm going to tell you right now, don't Google it. I used to work in a super strict school for kids who got kicked out of their regular schools. We had an assembly twice a day, morning and afternoon, that was extremely serious. Kids had to sit up straight with their hands in their laps, girls on one side and boys on the other. Totally silent, that kind of thing. Occasionally, when we were having behavior problems with entire groups, we'd make them sit in assembly for the remainder of that period or however long until they could get it together. There was a class of middle schoolers, naturally, who could not stop farting. They'd intentionally fart as loud as they could to be gross and disruptive, and it even evolved into them getting up out of their seats and farting on each other. This is hilarious to me now, but it got really old and really smelly. Anyway, one day it was happening so much throughout each class that we took them to assembly. I'm standing in front with one of the other teachers, and our principal was talking to them, except he was mad. So he's pacing back and forth, reaming these kids out, punching his fist into his hand, spit flying out of his mouth. His face is bright red. He's saying all this stuff about respect, and then he adds in, "Oh, and if you have to fart?" And he yelled the word fart with such venom and disdain that I just lost it right there in front of everyone. I could not stop laughing. I tried to play it off like a coughing fit or something, but I couldn't. I had to leave the room. Not a teacher, but the last time I was sent to the principal's office was over a live chicken in high school. The high school I went to used the 8-block schedule system. My last period teacher was afraid to the point of hilarity of birds. We had chickens at home, and since they were 4-H chickens, they were quite docile. I put one in a duffel bag one morning and then put it in the top shelf of my locker. They'll just fall asleep if it's dark. So once last period came, I put it in the bag. She was used to us all bringing bags in since it was last period, and when she got up to put the attendance slip on the door, I just took it out of the bag and put it in the middle of the room. Hilarity ensued, and I spent the next day playing Pokemon in suspension in the cafeteria. Is it really suspension if they just let you hang out and play Pokemon? The year was 1987. Second grade me decided to bring the Penthouse mags I found under my dad's bed to school. I found them the night before and thought up this whole plan. It was cold, so I slid them in between the pocket of my jacket before leaving in the morning. Shortly thereafter on the playground, I was showing my buddies all these beautiful women. Finally, get to class and found out my teacher was ill and was replaced by a sub. Thinking I had it made, I slid the mags under all my papers in my box and just went about my day. Just before lunch, the sub started going through boxes, searching for a folder for the neighboring teacher. That's when she screamed. The sub was waving the Penthouse at me while dragging me to the principal's office. To make things that much better, my sweet 80-year-old grandma was the one to pick me up. I made the mistake of leaving a 9th grader in my classroom when he missed the bus home. I had to go to a meeting and it was pouring rain, so I let him stay. I told him not to use the computers. The meeting was in the computer lab. We were learning how to see all of the students' computers on our own screens. The tech guy had us all pull up our first period classes on our monitors to test it out. No student should have been logged onto a computer at the time. All the screens should have been blank. I saw that a very conservative Jehovah's Witness teacher in the row ahead of me had one screen lit up on her multi-screen view. I watched as she clicked on the screen to see it larger. She gasped. She made a small whining sound. It was anime-style adult content. It was the screen of the student I had left alone in my room. The teacher quickly turned around, calling my name very loudly, and asked if the student was in my classroom. I told her he was. I got up and went to the phone at the back of the room. I called my classroom number. The student answered. I said, "You're doing something you shouldn't be right now, aren't you?" He said, yeah. I said, "I suggest you turn it off right now." I heard footsteps running across the floor and a slam. He returned to the phone. I'm so sorry. I'm sorry. We'll talk about this later," I said. I hung up. What an unlucky kid. He chose to watch that on the wrong day at the wrong time. I don't know about unlucky. Sounds like he just made a really bad decision. There was a student with autism who lived in a very literal world. We'll call him T. You had to be very precise with your words, as T could not comprehend slang or figurative language. He had an issue with another student at recess the day prior. It was something minor about a basketball. Basically, T had a basketball and placed it under the goal and walked away. Another student grabbed it. T became angry and ultimately gave the ball to the other student rather begrudgingly. Apparently, T told his uncle, and the uncle's response was, "I'd have made that kid eat a poop sandwich." Well, T made a quick stop by the litter box before coming to school. He also wrote a note to the other kids saying, "I get the ball today, you can have this poop sandwich." It wasn't a gesture he viewed as inappropriate. He actually thought the poop sandwich was a viable option for the other student. I had to send him to the office, but my God did I laugh. Even his mom laughed before apologizing. The principal still has the note in the office 2 years later. I'm sure the kid receiving the sandwich probably didn't find it as funny. I'm not a teacher, but my mother is. A kid in her class asked if she had any kids. At the time, I was my mother's only child. She mentioned me and the kid goes, "Well, what school does he go to?" And of course, my mom answers without hesitation. The kid goes, "Good, I'm gonna blow it up." Instantly expelled. Yeah, I don't think there's any other course of action to deal with something like that. I didn't even send the kid. I was too amused. I asked one of my students to come smash a giant spider on my desk. Being 9 years old, he walked up with an impressive swagger, trying to show all his friends how brave he was. He took one look at it and whispered, "Oh, F word." I was the only person who heard him, so I just stifled my laughter and told him I wouldn't write him up if he killed it. He did and was the talk of the lounge at lunch. I teach at a university, so I didn't send him to the principal, just out of class. I once told a student to leave class because he never brought his textbook and constantly played on his phone. So after 2 classes of this, I told him to get out because he was distracting other students. This kid freaked out, yelling and cursing at me. Keep in mind, I'm a 5'2" female and this kid's about 6 feet. The rest of the class is like, "What the heck?" And I stared him down and said, "Get the F out of my classroom!" Kid picked up his books and left. From that point on, anytime someone screwed up in class, the rest of the class would shout, "Get out of my classroom!" at them. They all thought it was hysterical that I cowed this giant. I mean, you gotta let them know who's boss early on. Teachers of Reddit, what's the most shocking or surprising thing you've seen going on in your classrooms? A kid stuck a craft pipe cleaner in an electrical socket. Cue a flash, a yelp, and blue fuzz everywhere. Socket and cover were both burned black and didn't get replaced for 3 years. The student was an 8th grader. I knew a kid who put a paperclip in an electrical socket and thought wrapping it in paper would protect him from the shock. In grade 10, the idiot had to go to the hospital because it screwed up his heartbeat. No matter what age you are, I think you should know you don't mess with electrical sockets. Back when I was in school, we had 3 of the 6 ambulance teams in the whole county called out to the school because one sunny day, someone passed the fad around that kids should hyperventilate and have someone push on their chests until they passed out. If I remember correctly, some 14 students had to be checked out and 1 taken to the hospital. I was a long-term sub for an art teacher that taught in the cafeteria. She warned me about a kinder kiddo named Romeo that had many issues, and told me to basically never turn my back on the class while he was in it. I didn't really pay too much attention to it because I was a genius substitute. But anywho, I turned around to grab something from the art cart and I heard a gasp from the other 22 kiddos. I turned around and he was standing on the lunch table with his pants down, shirt pulled up and yelling, "Who wants to kiss it? My name's Romeo!" I was mortified. I'd hate to know where the kid learned that behavior. My dad is a teacher, and this is his favorite story. As a PhD student, he was teaching American history at a small high school. As he was lecturing, he noticed an odd smell, and an enormous football player walking toward him from the back of the class. The football player hands my dad a note which says, "I have just pooped myself." Not a word is said. My dad simply nods to the student, and the student walks quietly out of the room to handle the matter. My dad kept the note for around 20 years, and would occasionally ponder the grammar of pooping oneself instead of just pooping oneself without the extra poop. There was a strange craze of crapping in books and leaving them in the library. Somehow, nobody was ever caught. One time when we were watching a movie in class, I saw the girl next to me touching herself. Let's just say my 16-year-old body full of hormones had good material for the next 6 months. What movie were you watching? One day, our teacher didn't show up to class and neither did her substitute. Some kid gave a 50-minute lecture on pimpology during that time. Sounds like the kid saw an opportunity and took it. I went to a small music school where basically everyone smoked all day. One day during midterm review, our audio professor yelled at the whole class for being under the influence for about 20 minutes. Nobody knew what to do. A very large, peculiar boy by the name of Thomas was caught pleasuring himself by sticking his stuff into the pages of books and thrusting. Might I mention typical Tom, as he was referred to, was a junior in high school. Surely you have better ways of taking care of that. A student pooped in the attic and threw it all over the walls during a break, then played it off as if it wasn't him and invited people to see. He's still in school. Not from my time as a teacher, but still relevant. Way back when I was a youth, there was a guy in science class. Let's call him Dan. Now, Dan was one of those kids who, for one reason or another, failed at all challenges involving common sense. He also liked to crush up chalk and snort it during science class. About the only thing Dan was good for was soccer. He played in the school team and was regarded as our best striker. Anyway, Dan's stupidity came to a head one day during an experiment set up by one of our chemistry teachers. She had a large container of chlorine gas she'd procured prior to the lesson at the front of the class. She explained what she was going to do, what the gas was, and ended her explanation with a stern, "Do not breathe this in." Then she got distracted by something and had to leave the room for a moment. She was gone no more than a second when Dan stood, dashed to the front of the class, opened the container, and took a long, deep, hearty snort of chlorine gas. The airborne ambulance made remarkably good time getting to the school, and somehow saved Dan's life, but it was a while before he came back to school, and he was a changed kid. He couldn't play football anymore. His lungs were permanently damaged, and even running short distances left him gasping for air. Not sure what became of Dan, but he taught me a valuable lesson about chlorine gas. Apparently it was used as a weapon during World War I. I can see why. I hate to say it, but this is Darwinism at its finest. In my classroom, we kept a television screen which can be connected to wirelessly. One day I was setting up a DVD about World War II, and it came up in the top right, Billy's iPhone connected. It then proceeded to play the infamous Paris Hilton tape. The kid was utterly shocked and later admitted it was a mistake. He was watching it in the back of the room and somehow connected it to the TV. Oh, poor Billy. I'm a high school teacher in American Samoa, a US territory. Tattooing is a huge cultural thing. A student I know, P, comes to me before school and asks if he can hang out in my room at lunch. Sure thing, I tell him. It's pretty common for kids to grab their lunch and hang out in a teacher's room. Come lunchtime, L comes to my room and asks if P has shown up. They're supposed to meet in my room at lunch. He hasn't shown up, so she sits and waits for him. Soon after, P comes in carrying his backpack and lunch. I'm sitting at my desk eating my lunch. finish. Suddenly, I hear a zzz sound. As soon as I heard the sound, I recognize it. I turn my head. L is sitting at a desk with one of her sleeves rolled all the way up. P is holding a tattoo gun in his hand a mere inch away from L's arm. What are you two doing? P does tattoos, miss. He's gonna do something for me on my arm. You can't get a tat in my classroom, L. P, put away your equipment. You can't give a tat in my room or at school for that matter. Tattooing being a cultural thing or not, I feel like that's a pretty brave move. I can't claim credit for this story, but it's a goodie that allegedly happened in my buddy's 4th or 5th grade class. So this 4th grader, that will henceforth be known as Conrad, apparently went on a family trip to China and came back with a pencil decorated with intricate dragon design that he absolutely adored. Like during class, he would take it out of his pencil bag and put it on his desk just to look at and admire, but never used or even sharpened it. One day, when Conrad left the room to use the bathroom or something, the kid sitting on his right, who we'll call Jim, picked up the dragon pencil, stuck it in a pencil sharpener, and ground that beautiful work of art until it was just an eraser with a stub, with a tiny amount of dragon design still visible. When Conrad comes back into the room, he seats himself and looks forward, noticing what's become of his most prized possession, but doesn't say a word. He then grabs the sharpened pencil that he'd been using to write, screams, and stabs it through the hand of the kid sitting to his left, Bill, incorrectly assuming he was the culprit. Needless to say, Conrad didn't come back to class the next day, or ever again. Not sure what's good with Bill's hand. Eesh, Bill was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'll be honest, I was rooting for Conrad though. I taught choir for several years to 7th and 8th graders. I've seen some stuff, man. One day I'm assisting another music teacher in a very big school, and things are going pretty smooth. I see this one kid looking kind of gray. Then he sways a bit and starts turning green. I know where this color changing act is headed, so I signal for the kid to head to the trash can. He made it to the can, but then threw up so violently that he sprayed it all over the walls and the double doors. I thought the sweet little sopranos that sat in that part of the room were either going to puke themselves or pass out. I had a hard time not laughing at them. So I send the kid to the nurse and go look for a custodian. I can't find one anywhere, so I have the secretary page one. Nobody shows up. I go looking again and find the head guy, old retired sailor, hiding in the kitchen doing something so he wouldn't have to clean up the puke. I tell him it's an emergency. The room was about 80 degrees as the HVAC was crap, and head to the room to help out with crowd control. Did I mention there were about 80 kids in the room? The custodian finally shows up and starts to mop the puke up and wipe down the walls. I walk over near him and say something like, "He really made a mess, huh?" The old salty dog replies in full voice, "Gosh darn effing kids making messes all over the gosh darn place. I hate this effing place." The sweet little sopranos were horrified. I had to walk away so I didn't lose it. Poor guy sounds like he's having a really bad day. I'm not a teacher, but my ex-girlfriend was. She had just started teaching kindergarten, and these two kids had a full-blown relationship. They would hold hands, kiss, and get angry when other kids started hollering at their partner. Weirded me the heck out when she told me. Kids start early these days. I was kind of a crazy kid in middle school, so I had this one friend. Let's call him Eric. The both of us were inseparable. Well, one day during study hall, we were both goofing off and had to be separated, so they put Eric in the quiet room. At the time, I thought it would be a neat idea to crawl through this air vent type thingy that was in the wall at knee level, which led into the quiet room right by Eric's feet. I quietly knocked out the other end and grabbed Eric by the feet, which made him scream. This, of course, got the attention of the teacher, who quickly ran over and grabbed my legs trying to pull me out of the air vent. Well, I didn't want to go peacefully, so I kept holding on to Eric's feet while the teacher kept pulling on my legs. It turned into a tug of war between my teacher and I, which I eventually won by crawling through the other end into the quiet room. I'm surprised I turned out normal. Hey, we all mess around when we're kids. Not a teacher, but one of the only memories I have from grade 1 was us sitting on the floor in the morning semicircle while our teacher went on about school stuff. There were about 3 rows to the semicircle with me sitting on the outside corner on a chair, so I could see everyone sitting down quite easily. We had this weird kid that just wasn't right. He'd belt out the national anthem as loud and off-key as possible every morning, even with everyone looking at him and not singing. So naturally, he decides that this semicircle is the perfect moment to whip it out and spit all over it. Then he spits on his fingers and starts Somehow, I'm the only kid that sees it. Not even the kids beside him. I sat there stunned for like 30 seconds wondering if anyone else was witnessing this, and why no one's doing anything, before the teacher noticed and snapped her fingers at him. He got the message. Props to her for not making a scene though. Kids are messed up. Not a teacher, but two kids would grope each other during class. The teacher never said anything, but it was pretty obvious, so she had to have noticed. The teacher probably just wanted to pretend it wasn't happening. My sister is a teacher. A girl had been disappearing for about 30 minutes a day in her homeroom period. After some investigation, it turns out the girl had been scheduling and giving blowies during that time. She didn't even make money off the deal either. She just gave them out of the goodness of her heart. In middle school, they had a detention in the study hall room, but the detention kids were put into separate rooms in the back with a tiny little window. There was a kid that pleasured himself in there, and the study hall teacher went in there and saw the kids' aftermath all over the wall. She yelled and told all of us to go into the hall. His phone was still out with adult content pulled up on it. The kid ended up being homeschooled after the incident, and I've only ever seen him once since graduation. A lot of the stories I'm hearing here seem to involve young kids needing to learn when to control themselves. This didn't actually happen on school property, but it was pretty shocking nonetheless. Two boys were assigned to be partners for a project in school. For the sake of clarity, let's call one boy John and the other boy Fappy. They were working on the project together at John's parents' home. While there, unbeknownst to John, Fappy stole a key to the house. It seems that Fappy was into some kinky, albeit tame by today's standards, stuff. And so it was quite surprising to John's family when Fappy was found wearing John's mom's underwear and touching himself in John's parents' bed. Now, I'm not one to actually believe that a story such that one hears in the schoolyard is necessarily true. However, it just so happens that my parents were friends with John's parents. After hearing the story at school, I asked my mom about it, and she confirmed it. Surprising to no one, the story caught on like wildfire, and Fappy's reputation for being a cross-dressing, self-touching criminal preceded him for the remainder of his time at that high school. That's not really the shocking part though. What actually surprised me about the whole incident was how insensitive the teachers, particularly the gym teachers, were to Fappy. They were just as ruthless as the students with their name calling and such. I would go so far as to even say that they incited much of the abuse toward him, and even encouraged the other students to ostracize him. As a teacher, you'd think you'd want to bring up that incident regarding that kid as little as possible. It's really just cruel to keep it going. One day, I was walking into class when I heard kids yelling and screaming like maniacs. Turns out it was a smoke bomb brought from Mexico that left the room smoky and smelling like urine. We got our backpacks searched, but nothing was found. The kid then confessed after the backpack search, so he and the one who gave it to him left with an officer. I haven't seen them since. Ah, the classic stink bomb. I remember one of those going off in high school. My school tried to do an experiment and tried to put all the male below average grade students and delinquents into one English class taught by a female teacher. It did not go well for her. When she stepped out to use the bathroom, we emptied all the bookshelf and her desk and threw them out the window. Kids hid behind the blinds of the windows and slept. One kid missed his bus sleeping through the next 2 other periods. We made dominoes out of the books. She actually joined us for this one. Another time when she stepped out, we stood books up and threw knives and scissors at them to see if they would stick. Learned how to throw knives that day. We were on a second floor that partially looked out onto the roof of the first floor. Kids would often just leave and enter through the windows. Not sure why. Our school hall pass was just a red laminate that had hall pass crudely written on it. We broke open a locked drawer to find a lamination machine and made everyone hall passes. But the weirdest of all, we all passed and actually did fairly well in her class. I actually took a copy of The Day No Pigs Would Die home because I liked it so much. Sounds like you had a good teacher for not only hanging in there, but actually managing to capture your attention along the way. I went to an all-boys secondary school and was 15 at the time this happened. Our class of 25 boys were coming back on a field trip in a packed minivan doing around 60 miles per hour on the motorway. The guy in the back right seat decides to announce that he's going to start pleasuring himself, and then stands up and goes through with it. There were 25 male adolescents on that bus. They weren't as shocked as the old couple in the next lane. Oh, that poor old couple. I'll never forget the look on that old woman's face as she peered into a school bus of children and proceeds to get an eye full of wang. The boy was expelled, rightfully so. In grade 4, my friends and I decided to protest in our class during lunch period because the school replaced the chip machine with healthy snacks. At first, it was no big deal. 5 or 6 of us just beginning to chant at our lunch monitor. But by lunch recess, it exploded into a full-force riot protest. We had hundreds of kids across 3 campuses in a colossal hive. It was one of my proudest moments, but it quickly turned into a nightmare when the teachers fought back. They tried to hurdle us up and gave an insane amount of detentions. I was one of the lucky few to escape before the genocide, but I still think to this day about those I lost that fateful day. Eventually, the school caved and offered semi-healthy snacks like Crispers and pretzels. I hope later generations appreciate the sacrifice we made, and I pray they live a more peaceful time than we did. I think our poster's blown this up into some grand battle in his head, but in actuality, most of these kids probably just wanted a reason to get out of class. We had a half-hour session with our mixed ability home class to start the day at my school, then all split up to go to lessons by ability streams for the rest of the day. I was in top groups for most things, but in this first hour, I generally ended up at the back of the room with the slower kids, and we started playing cards or poker dice. Never for money, though. After this had been going on for a few weeks, I was caught in a quiet corner by the teacher, and thought I'd get in trouble for leading them on. Instead, she just said how it was really good for them to concentrate for that length of time on something, especially something requiring maths and patterns, but that if any of the other staff came in, to hide it all quickly. It's always nice when you think you're going to get in trouble and you just get a general thumbs up from the teacher. Not a teacher, but also a student. At the age of 12 to 13, we had math class with a temporary teacher. Let's call the teacher A. In our class, we had the typical students who did stupid things without thinking. Let's call them B1 and B2. Out of nowhere, while everyone solved their math problems and A was walking around helping the students, B1 and B2 threw their pens and accidentally dropped it to different locations. That way, they could roam free in the classroom. When they went to pick up their pens, they'd also whip out their junk, doing the helicopter and rubbing their junk on different furniture. It became almost like a game for them. The one who got caught first lost. How's that fun for you? It's just weird and you're creeping out everybody around you. Not me, but my parents are both teachers. My dad teaches drama and directs a school play each year. I can remember on the first night of one of these shows a few years back, he came back and said that whilst he was checking backstage during one of the set changes, he found a kid peeing into a bottle because he forgot to go to the toilet before his part. It was really funny but shocking because this is a really posh school. Hey, I don't care who you are, everybody's gotta pee. We had our study hall sign-in in the same room that kids would serve in-school suspensions. Well, one day I walked into a kid pleasuring himself and finishing all over the floor. He then zipped up his pants and walked out to a very stunned professor. Come on, guys, control yourselves! I'm not a teacher, but this happened to my friend. We were sitting in the back of the classroom, and being freshmen in the South, some of us picked up dipping tobacco. Not me though. So my friend decided he's gonna put a dip in class while the teacher was giving a lesson. If that wasn't dumb enough, a while later the teacher's done with the lesson and we're all just chit-chatting. But I notice he's sitting in his seat to himself. Moments later, he starts gagging and coughing. But no one really paid attention. We were pretty loud. I go up to him and check on him, and he said he threw up the dip. It was in the back corner of the classroom, so it wasn't noticeable. I glance over his desk to see there's tobacco-ridden puke with red juice all over it. I ask him what the heck that was. Apparently he didn't want to be caught with the dip, so he tried to make it seem like he threw up the juice instead. However, when he noticed that wasn't going to work either, he just left it. After I processed how stupid he was, the bell rang and we all left. Throw up still on the floor. I mean, in your situation, I guess you guys just call that one a win, right? Mechanics of Reddit, what vehicles will you absolutely not buy or drive due to what you've seen at work? Never buy a car the first year they redesign or remodel it. Always run into issues that they fix the second or third year they release it. This is probably good advice for more than just vehicles. Do not buy Ford Fiesta or Focus automatics from 2012 to 2016. Their power steering is messed up. Their transmission is messed up. Both had a class action lawsuit out. Not a mechanic and not in the US. Currently living in Mexico. Graveyards in Mexico are filled with people dead from car crashes in the Nissan Suru. A complete piece of crap with wheels that has 0 stars in safety. Parts are cheap and gas mileage is good, but they're just coffins with wheels. Just this year, Nissan Mexico is going to cease its production. 3 years after the Latin NCAP made the security tests and scored 0 in everything. Even with all these facts, it's the most bought and stolen car in Mexico. Gen 1 Porsche Cayenne. They're getting cheap enough for most people to afford, but the cost of maintenance is ridiculous. That goes with any premium manufacturer. You always got to keep the maintenance cost in mind. You might get something dirt cheap with a really nice badge and name on it, but it's going to cost you a lot to fix it up come time. 2012 to 2016 Ford Focus. The clutches go constantly, to the point where they made it a service bulletin, and it continues to happen after the warranty is up. Yeesh, we're only this far in and we've gotten 2 red flags on the Ford Focus. That's not a good sign. When I was looking to buy a used car, I found a Land Rover for $2,000. My father, who was a mechanic, said to me, yeah, it'd look great on the back of a tow truck. My dad's a mechanic and he always says Volkswagen New Beetles. My first car was a Volkswagen New Beetle. Needed a new radiator? Guess the whole front end is coming off, again. I had to work on one of those, but the problem I had with it was that it was the largest feeling car I'd ever driven. Yes, it's a tiny thing and I knew the front bumper was only like 3 feet in front of me, but it felt like the car's a mile long. I worked for a major Japanese auto designer you're all familiar with. We used to do an event where we took a vehicle apart piece by piece, every single piece, inspecting, weighing, measuring, and comparing them to our parts. We did this for every design model and with every competitor. Never once was any Chrysler vehicle mentioned, not even in comparison documents. It was the ultimate disrespect. They weren't even considered a competitor, not even for some portion of their vehicles. I saw a lot of different cars broken down and close up. I have a lot of good things to say about competitors, but Chrysler Dodge Jeep is not one of them. Yugo. Although it's pushed to start, just make sure to keep your back straight when pushing as to not injure yourself. Well, that's not the greatest vote of confidence, is it? Subarus are great cars, except for the Tribeca. At work, we call them turds. I don't know if I've ever even heard of the Tribeca. Chrysler Sebring, specifically the V6. Alright, that's a couple warnings for Chrysler owners now. We're keeping tallies here. Any new model automatic Focus. The manual transmission are fine, but the automatics are the most trash pieces of crap. We've had multiple come in with less than 5K miles with transmission leaks. I've not driven one that doesn't shudder when you accelerate from a stop. My god, the Focus is getting destroyed out there. I just bought a used Suzuki Swift for cheap, only to find that Suzuki has pulled it out of North America entirely. We've already had issues with it, so this is gonna go great. Always look into that kind of thing before buying a car. You need to know you're gonna be able to reliably get it fixed. My mechanic tells me never to touch an out-of-warranty BMW. He owns 2, and says the electronic gremlins have driven him insane, and are virtually unfixable by a non-dealer mechanic, requiring things like circuit board replacements, proprietary software readers, and things like that. That's why my friend keeps his 1995 BMW. It's one of the last ones you can work on yourself. Of course, that means at this stage in its life he's working on it a lot, and there's not much he can do about the body rusting. Mercedes-Benz are gonna put my kid through college. Every part is artificially inflated, and I have a theory that every job takes some messed up specialty tool just so you have to be at the dealer or a German shop. Also, any Cadillac with the Northstar V8. Just heck no. Also Dodge. New ones are garbage and old ones will run for 400K, but the body is gonna rust off the frame by 100. The Reliant Robin. Never trust a car with 3 wheels. Never! If you guys haven't seen the Top Gear clip of this car, seriously, go check that out after you're done with this video. The Reliant Robin. I have a love-hate relationship with my old Land Rover Discovery 1. More than capable, but stupid crap broke. What made me get rid of it? The freaking door handles. Couldn't get dealer replacements and used ones were going for over $300 a set. Made me say screw it, and I junked it. Alright, that's Land Rovers coming in a couple times now. The Pontiac Sunfire. I own two, and you have to take the front wheel off to do an oil change. Worst design choice ever. When I lived in Japan, I had a van that required me to remove the ashtray to check the oil. I thought it was a joke when I was reading the instructions, but nope. Other than that, ran like a champ. It was a Mazda Bongo Friendly Turbo Diesel. That's a pretty cool name for a van. Can we get stuff like that in North America? I've come across a few wrecks involving smart cars. The best thing I can say about them is that they aren't hard for the fire department to pry open and get the body out. I had to drive a smart car for a tech job in Michigan. One of the clients was being lazy and the owner asked me to drop off a laptop on the way back to the office, so I ended up in a different lane than I would normally be in. I stopped at a busy intersection and I look into my rearview mirror and notice a car is coming up pretty quickly, 40 miles per hour. No way he saw the light. Older guy, not sure if he was distracted or not. He slams directly into me. Strangely, I wasn't scared so much as angry when I realized what was about to happen. He slams into my back and I figure it's probably the end of me. I get pushed into the guy in front of me and I can feel an ache, but I walk out pretty much unscathed. The back of the car looked impeccable. The front that got pushed into the other car was smashed to heck. No airbag or anything. Thanks, seatbelt. It started leaking fluids and the car itself was totaled, but I got out okay. Still debating if that was lucky or not, but a question for different subreddits. The most concerning part about that is that the airbag didn't deploy. Isn't that like the one thing that's supposed to happen? Smart cars do look like they would crumple pretty easily though. A lot of comments say Dodge. What is it about Dodge? Is it all Dodge vehicles? I thought their trucks were supposed to be pretty reliable. I have a Dodge Neon and it runs like a piece of crap, but there seems to be little that anyone can actually do to kill it, and it's really cheap to fix. Yeah, but they're really cheap to fix for a reason. They're built really cheap. That's why it runs like crap. My immediate family all drive Honda. We're all good friends with the owner of a local dealership. We've all had multiple models hit 200K plus without issues. I've had my Accord for 11 years and have about 210 miles on it, and last week was my most expensive repair. Replaced the battery lead cables. $200 said and done. We've driven Pilots, Accords, Odysseys, Civics, not an issue. I'll never buy a car that isn't a Honda or Acura. Opposite end of the spectrum, a lot of Japanese makes are very reliable. Honda is always a top contender because they tend to be very affordable, and as our original poster pointed out, repairs are typically pretty cheap as well. I own a frame and suspension shop. My answer, Dodge. Alright, Chrysler Dodge Jeep is getting crushed out there. To be fair, Jeeps haven't been called out in particular yet, but they are all the same manufacturer. Mercedes-Benz G-Wagon. They may look nice, some people think so, but they're uncomfortable as heck to drive in, extremely expensive to fix and upkeep, and tend to break fairly often. Not a mechanic, but from my experience, screw any Taurus made around the year 2000. They'll run forever, but you don't want them to. The windshields leak and the insulation under the carpet is made out of some recycled fiber that smells disgusting when it gets wet. Son of a Mazda mechanic here. If you live in the north or anywhere it gets remotely cold, do not buy an RX-8. It won't work 3 to 4 months out of the year and will need constant expensive care in the other months. Any US Navy submarine. Talk about overpriced. And parts? Good luck. We don't have any money. Oh, it's a nuclear part? Never mind about us being broke. Here's $400 for that 2-inch O-ring. May as well order 12 of them while you're at it. Source: nuclear mechanic in the US Navy. You know, the thread is open to vehicles, so this qualifies. Dodge Grand Caravan, 60,000 miles on it, and I've replaced the rear brakes 5 times, and it already has a misfire. Mark another one for Dodge. First and foremost, no Chrysler products, ever. No Chrysler, no Jeep, no Dodge. They're trash vehicles made by a trash company out of trash parts. The diesel engines in the trucks are the only thing worth a damn, and they don't make them. The old Jeep Inline 6 was great too, but everything they put it in would fall apart around it. I know most people reading this aren't in the market for one, but Land Rovers are hot garbage. Expect screwy electrical issues that have your mechanic chasing his tail for the life of the vehicle. Anything German is going to be too expensive to fix, with the exception being Volkswagen. And even if they can rack up the miles on the odometer, you'll have tons of stupid problems from cheap manufacturing. Alright, someone start digging the grave for Chrysler. Ran a bumper-to-bumper, all makes and models shop in Las Vegas on the edge of Summerlin, our rich area. To start, I'd like to specifically point out the Isuzu Rodeo. I won't even work on one. I turn them away at the door. Haven't found one without more repairs than it's worth. BMWs can be a monster. They're just super expensive for parts and not always as well engineered as you'd be led to believe. Mercedes, Mitsubishi, and Audi also have expensive parts. Dodge, as has been said, has really dropped the ball for the last few decades. I drive a 70s in decent shape. When it comes to GM and Ford cars, their upper tier is alright, but the mid and lower tiers are junk. Buy a Nissan or Toyota, please. Even a Honda. GM and Ford are truck dealers, and they know it. Lastly, I can specifically point out the GM Cadillac Northstar engine found in 90s and 2000s models. It puts Dodge to shame. Leaks from every seal, and the starter motor, an otherwise common part, is located in the valley of the engine, literally the center of the motor, under the lower intake manifold. I think the book time is like 6 or 8 hours. Most starters are close to 1 hour labor. The 90s models even have a liquid-cooled alternator. You know, like the new age liquid-cooled PCs. Let's run our water into our electrics. Except car engines get much hotter, vibrate non-stop, and are expected to go further than your PC. Lot of insight from that user. Again though, a lot of repeat names too. Claims adjuster here. I've seen more than a handful of Hondas, Civics, and Accords hit a deer full speed and still be able to drive them to a safe location. Solid. I love how in a thread where we're supposed to be talking crap about crappy cars, we're actually hearing some upvotes for Honda. My mechanic told me never to buy a Volkswagen, so I bought an Audi. The turbo failed at 100K. For those of you who aren't aware, Volkswagen owns Audi. Everyone laughed when I bought my Kia, but I don't see it listed here. Knock on wood. Kia got their crap together in the middle of 2006. There's actually a 2006 model of the Kia Optima and then a much better 2006.5 model. From that model onward, they've been decent cars. The running joke about old Kia was they were so cheap you could buy two, one to drive and one to take parts from. A cheap Escort or a brown Probe. We're still talking about cars, right? Franchise garage technician / state vehicle inspector here. Any Cadillac with the Northstar V8 engine. It has a feature that shuts cylinders off at low load to save fuel but makes a lot of noise when active, for miles per gallon gain that aren't really impressive today. Something like 20-25 city highway. It's also notorious for leaking oil. It's been engineered to be able to run for up to 50 miles with no oil, because designing an oilless engine is easier than fixing all the leaks in a Northstar. I've never seen one not leaking out of somewhere. Next, about German luxury. They're not inherently bad cars, but maintenance is more expensive than most folk expect. So people buy used thinking they're a steal secondhand, and then a year later they've got no-name Chinese tires, squeaky brakes, and 5 warnings lit up on the dash because their 2002 Taurus only took 2 $30 oil changes every year. Why would this be different? Honestly though, I think the drivers put me off more than anything. Caddy and especially Nissan just attract a certain kind of person. That car is either spotless and new or the grossest pit of human goo you'll ever sit in. Crumbs in between everywhere, dank smelling ashtrays in the cup holders, all the surfaces are sticky, and weird dark spots in the cloth seats where a person would normally go. Nasty stuff. We've had a few references to this specific engine from Cadillac now. There may be some of you that want to look into that. Of course, if you have one, you might already be aware. How about medics have read it? Because Volvo, yes. Ford Explorers, no. Dodge Neons, also no. Honda, also yes. I'm also kind of amazed that more people don't shoulder tap their firefighter, medic, or emergency room doctor friends for car purchasing advice. I was in a really bad accident while I was driving a Honda Accord. The car didn't make it, but the police and firefighters were pretty surprised that I did. Honda for the win. Guys, if we're learning anything from this thread, it's buy a Honda. Motorcycles are my thing. I wouldn't touch a Ducati or any modern BMW. Build quality is abysmal. On another note, all cars will crumble to dust before my old 2002 Yaris does. Japanese import. Without a doubt, the best little crap box of a car on the face of the earth. When the apocalypse comes, the cockroaches will be all that's left alive and they'll be driving that 2002 Yaris. I'm imagining a Mad Max future where everyone drives around in a Yaris. Used car salesman here, so I'll list in order from worst. Number 1, any Rover. You know it's bad when an extended warranty costs $15K. 2, most Audis over $50K. 3, anything Chrysler. 4, Ford economy cars. These being Escapes, Fiestas, and Fusions. Motors are usually okay, but electrical can be hit or miss. Every car is different, so don't take my word for it. Just get a warranty if you can. Number 5, Nissan Leafs. I could keep going, but yeah. I want to say that's the first Nissan we've seen, but maybe not. Anyhow, another hit on Chrysler and cheap Fords and Rovers. Eesh. Don't buy a 2013 Jetta. It has general mechanical issues, and if you crash it, it's screwed, trust me. After owning a Jeep, never own a Jeep. At least not as your primary car, and have plenty of funds to fix it. Something I've picked up on over the years if you want to buy a car. I'm sure some will disagree, but it's just a general guideline. 1974 and earlier, buy American. Ford 200 inline 6 will outlast us all and decent mileage to boot. 1975 to 1995, buy German. More rigorous maintenance but built to last forever. 1995 plus, Japanese. Cheap, reliable, no frills cars. 2010 plus, Japanese and Korean. Top of the food chain at the moment. More advice recommending to buy Asian. I don't know guys, not looking like a whole lot of other options out there. My Hummer H3 is the worst car on the planet. Since hitting 110K, I've had to do a $700 to $900 repair every 2 months or so. The car is paid off, but with these repairs, I might as well be having a car payment. Dude, look up recalls and get them fixed. My boss's H3 went up in flames and burned to the ground because there was a recall he didn't know about. Fire started under the glove box. This could just be punishment for owning a Hummer. Mechanic here. To be fair and honest, there isn't a single brand or model to pinpoint. It's all about how you take care of it. I've seen $200,000 cars that I wouldn't take a leak on to put out a fire, and I've seen $2,000 vehicles that are apocalypse proof. Some of my friends and coworkers spend so much money on repairing their cars or buying new ones, just to neglect them and get to the same, oh, it's a piece of crap mentality. Meanwhile, my derelict in appearance 18-year-old truck, I've been the owner for the last 8, soldiers on with just basic service and a few fixes and upgrades here and there. That is an important factor at the end of the day. A lot of it comes down to the owner. You have to take care of your car. Glad to see my Chevrolet Silverado surviving this thread just fine. Dodge trucks, not so much. Maybe you haven't been paying attention, but at the same time, a lot of the comments we've had have said that the trucks are better, so at least you have that going for you. This may be an unpopular opinion, but I'll say V6 Hondas and Acuras with 5-speed automatics. The transmission is fine in 4-cylinder cars, but apparently has a fluid passage design flaw that can become further restricted with debris, causing overheating and failure of one or more clutch packs. The issue seems to manifest itself due to the extra torque in V6 applications. I believe it only affects models years 2002 to 2006. There's a reason that the 03 Accord Coupe V6 is a third the price of a similar 4-cylinder model. The V6 might be on its second or third transmission. First mark against Honda and Acuras here, but to be fair, we're talking about 20-year-old cars here, so I don't think we need to worry about that too much. Everyone throws out a turd now and then.
What's the creepiest thing you've ever found in an old building? Went to an abandoned hospital. There was a large square staircase spiraling up to the roof on the outside of the building. Locked steel door at the bottom, so the only way up was to climb the outside up to the first landing. My buddy boosts me up. I climb over and there's a sleeping bag with a steak knife next to it on the landing. I call down, we're definitely not alone here, dude. No, but it's cool, says a voice behind me, scaring the crap out of me and causing me to jump and whirl around. There's a young, dirty, homeless-looking guy just standing there, coming down the stairs from above, hands up, palms out. I didn't mean to scare you. He takes a seat on the stairs, so I carefully step on the handle of the steak knife, lean down over the edge, and pull my friend up. We had planned to sit on the roof and drink beer, so we offer homeless guy a beer, which he gratefully accepts, and we shoot the crap on the landing for a while. We're talking about the city, the cops, traveling, life in general. He's basically a drifter, been in town for a week or so, but a nice guy. Things are going pretty well, and then he asks, "You guys are human, right?" I frickin' hate it when I meet people that end up being aliens. You never know until you peel their skin off. They've been after me a long time, you know. They don't stop. They never stop. Sometimes I think I should just kill everyone to be safe. He's definitely not joking, and there's an uncomfortable silence as my friend and I realize this guy is freaking crazy. "Yeah, man," I say, "we're human, we just wanted to check out the place and drink some beer. We're gonna go ahead and move on now. We definitely don't want to be any trouble." He just stares in silence, so we leave him the last beer, carefully back up to the railing, jump down and walk away very quickly, constantly looking back over our shoulders the entire time. He's just standing there, still and silent, watching us leave. That place is still abandoned 5 years later, and we've never been back. I'm not a believer in the supernatural, but humans can be deceptive and dangerous in ways that you can't see coming. Holy crap! This guy seemed chill, but meeting people like him is what makes me tense when reading these stories. Ghosts, monsters, screw that. I'm worried about meeting some unpredictable creep or a Satanist mid-ritual. Also, serial killers. I wonder how many of his ilk I pass in normal places every day. Definitely don't want to meet them anywhere, especially alone in a dark abandoned building. That's a cool story for sure though. A group of my friends and I explored an abandoned asylum/mental hospital a couple of years ago in the OKC metro. It was very unsafe at night for a silly college freshman like us. The first experience we had was all of us taking our merry time, enjoying the darkness and generally messing around. You have to come in through a broken window, and we were all gathered at the window just being dumb when we hear loud, echoing footsteps down the hall running toward us. We all did that. Who the heck isn't here? Who's messing with us? Look and turn, and after realizing that we're all present and none of us are sprinting down a dark, abandoned hallway, we booted it out of there. The second time we could hear a group of people messing with us, jumping from around corners and such, but they never got too close. We assumed it was an animal at first, but got brave and realized it was a person. We managed to catch them, and after staring at a collection of seemingly drugged-up 20-somethings who begged us for cans of paint and cigarettes, we got the not-so-good vibes. Finally, you say? And we tried to leave. The leader of the haunted asylum cronies asked if we had jewelry, which we denied. He then said the creepiest thing I've heard in my life. "I like jewelry. I take it off the girls here when they sleep." We freaking bolted. What? Why ever did he run? Seemed like a nice, well-adjusted fellow. People these days are so judgmental. I'm kidding, of course. I wouldn't blame you if you were still running, guy who wrote this story 6 years ago. Nothing big, but I was once exploring a drainage tunnel with friends. We were pretty deep inside of it and turned a corner to see someone leaning against a wall with a hat on. It ended up being a sandbag someone dressed up, but it scared the crap out of me because it was pretty deep in there. There were pants and shoes and a jacket with a hat on it. I don't know what they did to make the jeans look like legs because I didn't touch it or go back. A friend of mine went back and told me it was a sandbag and I was already done for the day. So someone a long time ago went in there and dressed up a sandbag just so someone else would be spooked? We were kids exploring an underground flood channel. There were spots we could climb up and dangle our arms out of the storm drains on the street, but that required crawling up weird diagonal tunnels. There were 4 of us, maybe 12 years old, 1 flashlight. The walls were all graffitied with a lot of gang stuff and even warnings to turn back. Blah blah blah. We just interpreted that as other kids being bored. We got to the spot where the ceiling angled down quite low to the point the opening was so small we had to crawl to continue. Challenge accepted. It looked like it opened up again shortly, so we crawled through 5 to 6 feet of the low area when it opened back up. It looked like we were in a large round concrete pipe, before it was square or rectangular. Still lots of graffiti. We started yelling and playing with the echoes, then we thought we heard something, so we got quiet. Then a real loud, "You're gonna freaking die," came echoing from the darkness. The kid with the flashlight ran so fast, the rest of us were left in absolute darkness. Anyways, this was the first time we passed the low spot, but the last time we went down there. None of us died that day, the rest of us ended up quietly and slowly walking out in the darkness. This isn't urban exploration, more rural exploration, I suppose you could call it. I was working on a project for a photography project. There was a massive forest up a mountain near where I live. Said forest contains an abandoned hospital that was shut down after an unexplained death. No, I'm not joking. So it's a crappy day weather-wise. I'm in a wood with a camera and a packed lunch ready to go wandering. After a few hours, I found a small camp with some abandoned tools, including a massive bolt cutter. Someone had tried to destroy them in a fire, but that was a no-go. Maybe 200 to 300 meters away, I found a burned-out car. Not an uncommon sight in the area. Kids buy super crappy, clapped-out bangers and trash them up there. Not far away, about running distance, I found a pair of woman's jeans. And a little further away from that, maybe 5 meters or so, there was a pair of panties hanging on a low branch. They'd clearly been there for a while. I'm not sure how long underwear would last exposed to Irish weather, and these were right out in the open, but a few weeks maybe? Pretty creepy finding all of that alone in the woods. I flipped through local news for anything on any break-ins, assaults, or anything suspicious, and couldn't find anything that had happened recently. For the record, I did contact police, but they pretty much told me it was just littering, no actual evidence of any wrongdoing. My friends, who always go exploring, told me about this time that they were just following a trail that went up into the hills, and after almost reaching the freeway, they ended up near an old closed-up train tunnel. They were able to squeeze through some of the loose fencing, and after wandering through with nothing of interest, they eventually came to a bunch of shipping containers. They told me that when they glanced inside, they saw a ton of weapons and ammunition in one, and just a crap ton of heavy boxes in the rest. After a few minutes of checking it out, they heard voices from further down the tunnel coming closer, so they got out of there. They also said it almost smelled like the ocean toward the end, so the tunnel might have led out near the beach. The place they hiked to was somewhere between Santa Barbara and Oxnard in California. As they stopped on the 101 going southbound and started their hike and ended up returning to the car and going to Oxnard at the end of the day. They made a report to the police, but I haven't heard of anything coming of that on the news or otherwise. Also, some people said it might be smugglers. But given that the crates were unlocked, the tunnel was unguarded, and it was accessible to anyone who wandered out there, I doubt that's the case. If it was, they were either just about to take off or they were really stupid smugglers. Last winter, I went into this abandoned parking lot under a closed shopping mall. It had 2 levels. The upper level had a bit of sunlight coming in through the windows, but the lower level was pitch black. I made my way down this wide ramp that the cars would use, and I decided to have a look at the bottom level. After turning my flashlight on, I noticed that the space was huge, much bigger than the upper level. I remember how the light danced through the many supporting pillars and cast vivid shadows. I said, "Hello," and "I'm just looking around," just to make my intentions clear, but was met with no response. So I decided to walk around for a bit, but couldn't see anything of interest. Just a lot of junk, some empty old bottles, but nothing that might indicate someone living or hanging around there. The place seemed completely abandoned, however this uneasy feeling that someone might be hiding in the pitch black shadow of one of these pillars took the better of me, and I climbed up the ramp. I left taking a different route and passed under an overhead clearing that snow had fallen through. Just as I was about to hop the fence and leave, I noticed that the patch of snow that had formed had footprints on it. I know this doesn't really sound horrifying when you read it, as the logical explanation was that some poor chap had probably taken shelter from the cold outside, inside the lot. But still, being there creeped the heck out of me. I don't know what's creepier, this place or you saying, "I'm just taking a look around to make sure nobody was there." If I were homeless and living in an abandoned place, I wouldn't respond to anybody saying, "I just want to look around." It seems like an easy way to make yourself a serial killer's next drifter victim. No thanks. Rural area landscape photography. Happen upon a long abandoned house and set up to snap a few images. Look in the window and it's perfectly furnished. Piano with music open, fishing gear, wood stove with fire nearby, magazines on coffee table, jackets on a coat rack, roll-top desk open with neatly stacked papers, family photos, small kitchen table with red tops and matching chairs, and one is pulled out. It was all covered in inches of dust. It looked like someone walked out in 1950 and never returned. That sounds equal parts haunting and beautiful. Although I'm not superstitious, my hackles would be up and I would be out of there at the first sign of any shadow that even looked vaguely ghost-like. Went to a closed-up mental hospital in my city with some friends at night. Everything was cool until we got to the basement, where there were 5-meter wide and 4-meter high lit tunnels going far to both directions. We headed down one and found a huge active generator. Then we went to the other way, and as we were about to hit another intersection, we saw 2 men wearing full green attire and face masks walking at the end of one of the corridors at 2 a.m. We got out of there real quick. This didn't happen to be in Northville, Michigan, did it? If so, it's really more of a teal outfit. Well, we found the crystal cook, guys. Went to an abandoned retirement home/assisted living facility. Turns out it became the home to a group of crazy homeless crystal addicts and one very angry raccoon. They did not like trespassers. The guardians of the galaxy have fallen on hard times. I was exploring a certain abandoned mill near a large city on the coast with a friend. We snuck in, messed around a bit, and realized that we only had one flashlight. Took turns, weird noises, dark inside because there's no power, evidence of homeless occupation, and empty needles. Real horror game material. We came up the stairway and turned a corner. Ahead is a walkway bridge, aka the way to the rest of the building. To the right is a pitch-black room that doesn't feel very nice. As we walk toward the bridge, the flashlight picks out a sign that says, "To hell," and points towards this dark room. We didn't go in. It didn't feel right. You can submit your own stories to be featured here on the channel. The story submission link is in the description below. And if you want to listen to some vibey music in the background, check out easymode, also linked below, and subscribe. My friends and I used to explore this old factory/processing plant, no idea what it was originally. Anyway, it had lots of underground sections that were pitch black, even a couple of meters from the entrance, but which also required going down a flight of stairs. One time we found a burned-out car 2 to 3 levels down. No idea how it got there, but that was kind of creepy. Another time we found a hole. We didn't bring torches or flashlights with us because we're idiots. But we had lighters and we were trying to figure out what the hole was or if it could lead anywhere. We put a stick in there and it ended up being at least 6 feet deep, but we also learned it was full of some liquid and that if we had fallen in we could have easily drowned in the dark. Another time we went a couple of levels down and one of us at the bottom started screaming shrieks of absolute terror and the rest of us thought that we were all going to be murdered. We all started running, everyone was screaming at this point and there was this sludgy crap on the ground and some of us slipped and fell just like in a gosh darn horror movie, slipping and sliding our limbs out of control. Again, there's 6+ people screaming bloody fricking murder with absolute fear and terror on their faces, so we all thought we were going to get murdered. Turns out a baby bird had made a nest down there and my sister got spooked and my friend screamed like an absolute baby. There was an abandoned hotel I was checking out. I gained access through a blown-out window near the indoor pool. It smelled like death inside. Came in to find a couple of bloated dead deer in the slime collecting towards the deep end of the pool. That should have been my sign to go. I make my way into the lobby and banquet areas, and I come across a couple of raccoons and squirrels who scurry away swiftly. Nearly everything is destroyed, even the reception desk has been ripped in half. Nothing of interest to photograph, just trash. Neat little piles of trash. After a bit of searching, I find the stairwell. There's an odd noise coming from above that I brush off as rain. I decide to skip a couple of floors because they're probably in the same condition as the lobby, and a lot of the exterior windows had been blown out. I get to 4 and open the door, not worried about noise as I'm confident that I'm the only sober person on the premise, if not the only person. As I pull the door open, the rain noise suddenly ceases completely. I point my flashlight down the hallway and see hundreds of geese poke their heads out of the guest rooms. I remember the moment when nothing moved and we just stared at each other as lasting several minutes, although I'm sure it was about 10 seconds. Here I am in the middle of the hall, geese of abandoned luxury staring me down. Once the initial shock of the sight wears off, I remember I'm only looking at half the floor. Behind me, geese aren't pulling a deer in the headlights move, they're coming toward me. Time to go. I close the stairwell behind me, only muffling the cacophony that erupted once I moved. As I hustled down the stairs, I realized the signs were there. Goose crap everywhere. I hit the lobby and turn toward the pool where a group of geese has collected as if they were trying to trap me. Luckily, they're just dumb birds. I got out to find the exterior of the hotel swarming with the frickers. There was one lone sentinel standing on the roof honking out a shrill command that the perimeter had been breached. Exploring an abandoned construction site. It's a site out in redneck country that's got a bunch of old construction vehicles getting overgrown with plants, and my girlfriend and I decide to check it out, to see what it's all about. We look around and don't see a whole lot. It's about to rain, so we decide to head out. As we're getting in my car, my girlfriend freezes and says, "There's a guy in the woods watching us." I crap myself and ask if she's sure. She repeats herself and says she saw her see him and he laid flat on the ground to hide himself. We noped out of there real frickin' quick. I live in a large African city which still has a fair amount of undeveloped or undevelopable space. And one rule to remember is that there is always someone else there that you may not see. There are people who sit alone, very quietly, in bushes or between boulders and other such places. They are, I think, harmless and don't do anything. But what they are doing has been a mystery to me for the 10+ years I've been here. Most of them are too well dressed or well taken care of to be homeless. One annoying thing is that they stare at you, or at least they don't hide the fact that they're watching you. I swear, if there was some completely inaccessible cave high up in a cliff here, requiring professional scaling equipment to enter, they would find a local African guy just chilling inside with no discernible means of how he got there. I mean, honestly, if he can get up there along with his means of cooking and entertaining himself, that just deserves an applause more than anything. Got to admire the effort. This phenomenon of the people in abandoned spaces has raised some questions, detailed here. This is the funniest crap I've ever heard. Please work up the balls just to talk to one and see what's going on. Well, greetings are very important here, so if I stumble upon someone like that, I'm obliged to greet them. They just greet back normally as if we're neighbors passing on the street. But I don't stop and talk because I don't know what they're doing. I've encountered this too in Madagascar. I'm not exactly sure what it's about. There it's just mostly older folks. Maybe they've reached a point in life where their kids are taking care of them, and they're respected, so they just hang out and think. I guess a lot of the ones I see are older, that's true. I went to the abandoned living complex in Pennsylvania called Concrete City. We walked around a bunch of the buildings and stuff. At one point, one of my friends yelled, "Rich, come here!" I ran over, and there they were, 2 little kittens on a staircase, with the words "Cloud Swag" spray-painted above them. We brought them home and I kept one. He still terrorizes me every day. When I was in college, a few friends and I went to this local abandoned hotel. It was a swanky place back in the 50s, but had just been sitting around abandoned and fenced off ever since. We walked by and saw an open window on a 2nd-story ledge and ended up finding an old wooden ladder nearby on the property. We went in and hung around a bit and saw a bit of great graffiti. The whole place was trashed with actual garbage as well as bits of the building that were falling apart. We made it up the staircase to the 3rd floor, looking in each of the rooms. The area we were in used to be the housing for the staff of the hotel. The 3rd floor was covered in garbage from throughout the years. We got to the last room on the 3rd floor and looked in it to find a lit candle, with no one else around. Realizing we weren't alone, we booked it out of there, and once we were outside, looked up to see someone watching us from one of the windows. Now, we went to college in a city with a significant homeless problem and assumed we'd just stumbled onto someone's home, but still, that crap freaked us out. They cemented up the place after another explorer fell down an open elevator shaft and broke his legs, and it has recently been renovated and they're turning it into an apartment building. Not the creepiest find, but definitely freaked us out in the moment. In conclusion, searching an abandoned hotel, we found a lit candle that wasn't ours and was secretly watched by a squatter on the way out. This happened 8 years ago when I was a sophomore in high school. My urban explorer friends and I were on a bike ride looking for cool places to explore in a relatively dilapidated area when we discovered a really creepy cave. An old abandoned cement mine, we later learned. We did some mild exploring that first day, but quickly realized it would require a lot more gear to thoroughly explore. Flashlights, respirators, etc. About a week later, 5 of us came back with the proper gear and a camera to see what we could find in the mine. We discovered that there was basically one main shaft that sloped downward and deeper into the earth, so we followed that main route. It was wide enough for a car to drive down and was pretty well graded, so the walking was easy. There were many rooms, old machinery, and rusting equipment off this main shaft, but we mostly avoided it in the beginning. We were trying not to get lost or confused. Along the way, the walls were littered with the classic abandoned graffiti, X was here, swastikas, initials and dates, phallic drawings, etc. As we got deeper and deeper, the graffiti really thinned out. At this point, the light from the entrance was long gone, and we were relying solely on flashlights. The air was so stagnant and hazy with particles that the light from our flimsy flashlights would only go 20 feet or so before getting totally obscured by dust. Thank goodness for the respirators. The glow sticks we had bought to mark our way to prevent getting lost were also basically useless because they would disappear in the haze only a few steps after dropping them, and we had only brought 10 or so. At this point, we started arguing amongst ourselves. Several of the crew was nervous about going any deeper with the air quality being so terrible, and without a good way to prevent us from getting lost. We were probably a quarter mile into the earth now. The rest of us managed to override that sentiment of fear by assuring them that the path was easy and straightforward. so we'd have to try to get lost. We were going to rely on our level-headedness, sense of direction, and flashlight battery life to get out. Despite the agreement to push on, it was becoming very creepy for everyone. We walked for a while in silence, hearing nothing but our own movements and the steady drip of water coming from somewhere deep in the cave. I think we were all pretty scared at this point, but no longer willing to admit that to each other. Then we stumbled across something that made us all stop cold. Dug into the side of the deep stone shaft we were slowly descending was a tunnel, an offshoot. It was narrow, you'd have to crouch to go through it, and it was also a good few feet off the ground, so it required a scramble to reach it. But that wasn't what made us stop, it was the graffiti. We hadn't seen any for 10 minutes or so and assumed that the artists never came this deep. But someone else clearly had, and the message they left us was ominous. The tunnel was lined with words written in white, all of them somehow relating to death and destruction. Scrawled throughout the tunnel were words like suffering, pain, plague, disease, and hell. It was pretty terrifying. Who else would come this far just to write such terrible messages in a mysterious tunnel that broke off from the main path? But there was no turning back now, we had to see where the tunnel led to. Despite our fear, we were overpowered by intense curiosity. So one by one, we crawled through the tunnel to the other side. What we found was a strange flooded chamber. Around the pool of water were many large stones, each covered in dozens of burned-out tea candles. There must have been hundreds of used tea candles in the place. The walls had a few creepy monster faces, poorly graffitied on them, and the tunnel entrance back to the main shaft was ringed with a spray-painted, blood-stained mouth. What was this place? Some weird ritual site for local Satan worshippers? An elaborate hoax set up by a bunch of kids? We couldn't find much evidence to figure it all out, and we were running out of adrenaline to keep exploring. We all crawled out of that weird hellhole and back into the main shaft, where we promptly headed toward the exit. When we finally saw that pincrack of natural light coming from the real world outside, we were flooded with relief. We never did figure out what that mysterious cavern was for, and I think I'm content to leave it a mystery. No, we didn't hear any monsters in the depths of the tunnel or find any bloody Satan praisers themselves, but just finding that room, buried deep in an old forgotten mine, was enough to creep us all out for a long time. When you subscribe, make sure to hit the bell to turn on notifications. Put the playlist on in the background to finish listening to all the stories, or if you want some vibey music to put on in the background, check out easymode. If you like Am I the Genius, give Am I the Jerk a shot. Everything linked in the description.